It's pretty funny.
Yes. I thought it was going to be cold in here today. Yeah, we're going to get started. Okay, we're starting. Yes.
Okay. All right, good morning. I'm Deborah Wall, Deputy Archivist of the United States. Welcome to the National Archives and this fifth meeting of the 2018-2020 term of the Freedom of Information Act Advisory Committee. We're pleased you're joining us, whether you're here in the McGowan Theater or on the National Archives YouTube channel. This committee is an important part of the FOIA landscape. It's gratifying to see so many FOIA experts from both the federal agency community and the requester community collaborating to improve the administration of FOIA. This committee's work is tightly linked to the mandate of FOIA that the Office of Government Information Services here at NARA identify procedures and methods for improving compliance with FOIA. The committee's work also, as we've said at previous meetings, connects directly to two of the National Archives' 4 strategic goals: make access happen and connect with customers. Today, we welcome representatives from another important group in the FOIA world, the Chief FOIA Officers Council, created by Congress in the 2016 amendments to the Freedom of Information Act. The council, co-chaired by the directors of OGIS and the Office of Information Policy at the Department of Justice, established the CFO Technology Subcommittee last fall, in accordance with a recommendation by the FOIA Advisory Committee. Today, we'll hear from the subcommittee's co-chairs about the group's work regarding what they've learned about the state of FOIA technology across the federal government. As agencies work toward a fully electronic government, we at NARA often note that excellent records management practices help ensure efficient and effective FOIA process. NARA and the Office of Management and Budget jointly issued a memorandum in June titled Transition to Electronic Records, with goals and guidance on managing federal records in an electronic environment. I understand that today the committee will begin discussing several draft recommendations from the Records Management Subcommittee, as well as surveys of both agency FOIA professionals and FOIA requesters conducted by the Time Volume Subcommittee. And the Vision Subcommittee has worked with the Time Volume Subcommittee on the surveys and begun discussing several of the long-term recommendations with the Records Management Subcommittees. Archivist David Ferriero and I thank you for your work and look forward to hearing your ongoing discussions and deliberations. I'll now turn the meeting over to Committee Chairperson Alina Simo. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our fifth meeting, as Deb just said, of the 2018-2020 term of the FOIA Advisory Committee, whether you're here in person, via telephone, or via live stream. I note that Joan Kaminer is unable to join us today. I also see two other members who are not here yet, Emily Creighton and Lee Steven. We will announce them when they arrive and make a big deal about the fact that they're late. Otherwise, we will mark them absent.
Sorry, Emily said she's calling in.
Oh, great. Thank you for letting me know.
She sent an email around earlier. I don't know if it went to everybody.
Great. So perfect segue into the folks who are on the phone. Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to check in with several folks who are on the phone. Kirsten gave me these in alphabetical order. So now I have to start with Emily Creighton. Emily, are you there? No. Okay, James Jacobs.
Hi, I'm here.
Good morning. Lizette Catilius, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Good morning. Ginger McCall.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning, Ginger. Michael Morrissey.
Good morning.
Good morning, Michael. Abby Mosheim.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning, Abby. Patricia Weth. No, Patricia. Okay. If Patricia calls in, she will announce herself. Anyone else on the phone that I missed that I did not call out? All right, I will work frequently to check in with those of you on the phone, but if I forget, please remind me. We do, again, have a very robust agenda. I will do my best to keep it moving along and stay on schedule so we can end on time. I have a few housekeeping notes. As most of you know, the FOIA Advisory Committee, which reports to the Archivist of the United States, provides a forum for public discussion of FOIA issues, and offers members of the public the opportunity to provide their feedback and ideas for improving the FOIA process. We encourage public comments, suggestions, and feedback that you may submit at any time by emailing FOIA-advisory-committee@nara.gov. At the end of today's meeting, we will, as usual, have time for public comments. If you are watching us on the NARA YouTube channel, an OJS staff member is monitoring the live stream throughout the meeting. So if you have any comments or questions, please submit them in writing, and we will read them out loud during the public comment period. We are live streaming this meeting, and we'll make the video, transcript, and meeting materials available on the committee's webpage as soon as possible. To promote openness, transparency, and public engagement, we post committee updates and information to our website, blog, and on Twitter at FOIA_ombuds. Stay up to date on the latest OJS and FOIA Advisory Committee news, activities, and events by following us on social media. We welcome Lee Stephen. Thank you for joining us. Information about the committee, including members' biographies and committee documents, are available on the FOIA Advisory Committee webpage on the OJS website. Another helpful reminder from our sponsors, the AV folks, please remember to say your name before speaking every single time. I'm somewhat guilty of that, so I will really work on that today. And for committee members, we have also laid out the AV reminders around the table, so feel free to refresh your recollections with what's written on the page in front of you. Before we approve our minutes from the last meeting, I would like to recognize the contributions of several of our NARA colleagues who have assisted Kirsten in her duties as designated federal officer. Two of those individuals are NARA employees whose year-long part-time detail to OJS has come to an end, sadly. Carrie Talashe Smith, an archivist with the Johnson Presidential Library in Austin, Texas, has provided research for the subcommittees as well as help with the minutes, which, despite posting the transcript and broadcasting on the National Archives YouTube channel, we are required to take and post by the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Liz Pickford, who also works for NARA, has been helping with many logistical details for scheduling of these meetings. We're definitely going to miss very, very much both of them. OJS also has an undergraduate student intern, L'Oreal Lambert, who has helped with some advisory committee work as well. Specifically, she combed through Chief FOIA Officer reports to help gather information for our report on how agencies use technology in the FOIA process. We are very grateful for their service. Please join me in a round of applause for their efforts this past year. Okay, now we need to approve the minutes from the last meeting, which Kirsten, I believe, sent around by email to everyone yesterday. She has incorporated edits from Tom Sussman. Thank you, Tom. And are there any other changes or edits that we have to make? No, I'm seeing heads shaking no. Folks on the phone, you guys are good with the minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
She and I have certified the minutes to be accurate and complete, which we're required to do under the FOIA Federal Advisory Committee Act within 90 days of our last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Thank you, Tom. No second required, but I'm always happy to entertain one. Do I have a second? Sure. Thank you, Ryan. All present in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Aye.
Those in telephone in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Either on the phone, or in person? Okay, the minutes are approved. We will sign them. An important reminder regarding scheduling. Walking backwards from our final meeting in June 2020, which seems like a long way away, but it'll be here before you know it. We are asking subcommittees to finalize all draft recommendations by early calendar year 2020, with an eye towards presenting them by the March 5th, 2020 meeting. In advance of that, at our December 6th, 2019 meeting, I will appoint a small working group of the committee to compile recommendations into a final report between the March 5th, 2020 and early May 2020. Thank you to Abby and Ginger, who have already volunteered to be on this working group. We could use a few more volunteers. It's never too early. So please let me know if you're interested. Just wanted to check in. Is Emily joining us now? Emily Creighton, are you on the phone?
I am here.
Oh, great. Hi, Emily. Good morning. So we could use a few more volunteers. As I said, it's never too early to volunteer. Let me know if you're interested. Ideally, all working group members would be able to get together in person. From past experience and the last term of the FOIA Advisory Committee, that seemed to work out best. That doesn't preclude anyone who needs to call in, but it's definitely preferred to be in person. I think we can, duke it out better that way. So before we launch into our substantive agenda, I would be absolutely remiss if I did not take this opportunity to recognize that very sadly today is Melanie Pastay's last meeting ever with the committee. As most of you know, Melanie announced that she will be retiring from the federal government after October 3rd. We are immensely grateful for her sustained and tireless contributions to the FOIA landscape, not only as a committee member for 3 terms, but of course as the director of the Office of Information Policy at the Department of Justice, a total of 36 years at DOJ. It's impressive. Melanie and I have crossed paths many times during our careers, first in 1986 when I joined OIP as a law clerk and she was an attorney advisor. I remember going to DOJ gym with her for aerobic classes. During my 23 years at DOJ, both federal programs and FBI, Melanie and I worked together on a number of high-profile and sometimes stressful FOIA litigations. But I especially enjoyed having Melanie as my client. She was always cheerful, even when things were not going too well. Of course, now as a director of OGIS, Melanie and I have worked together not only on this committee, but co-chairing the Chief FOIA Officers Council and working collaboratively on many FOIA issues. As Melanie acknowledged in her email to me back in July when she shared her retirement news with me, we have certainly done a lot in the FOIA world, she said. But she is the one who leaves us with an indelible mark on the FOIA world and on all of us. Please join me in thanking Melanie for her devoted federal service. We will miss you very, very much. Okay, so the fun part's over. Now we have to get to work. So first up is going to be Martha Murphy, our Deputy Director from OGIS. We have shifted the agenda around a bit from our last meeting. She is going to come up to the podium. She is here at the podium to update us not only on past FOIA Advisory Committee recommendations, but also on best practices at the request of one of our committee members. As you all know, Martha has been doing a great job of tracking those recommendations. And Martha will also introduce our guest speakers for today, Eric Stein from State Department and Michael Sarek from Veterans Health Administration, who are linked to one of the past FOIA Advisory Committee recommendations. So with that, Martha, take it away.
Okie doke, thank you. So as Lena alluded to, in addition to updating the committee on our progress with the previous committee's recommendations, we've been asked to discuss how we've promoted and assessed the implementation of the best practices outlined in the previous committee's final report. So I'm going to begin there and then provide an update just on the 3 recommendations whose status has changed since our last meeting. So since the best practices were published in the 2016-2018 Advisory Committee report, OGIS has promoted the best practices through presentations and publications. At OGIS's open meeting in May of 2018, we hosted a panel of advisory committee members who went over the work and recommendations of the committee, including the recommended best practices. Then, utilizing the opportunity for communication offered by the American Society of Access Professionals, ASAP, in the summer of 2018, we presented on the best practices at an ASAP Food for Thought luncheon and at the ASAP National Training Conference. And finally, in an effort to reach out specifically to the Chief FOIA officers, we held a CFO Council meeting in October of 2018, where the main focus of the meeting was explaining the best practices. Finally, we referred to the best practices in our 2019 annual report to Congress and the President, which was published in March of 2019. As far as assessing the degree to which agencies are adopting the best practices, OGIS assessed the implementation of best practices when evaluating the responses to the CFO report question that went out last year. In our published assessment regarding leveraging technology to improve FOIA searches, we noted that the responses to the CFO question showed some progress on 3 of the recommendations. I would point you to the assessment, which is published on our website, for more details. But just at a high level, We found references to designating a point of contact to approve search requests within records management systems, which was one of the best practices, as well as another creating add-on IT systems for exporting records, and finally, making the end goal of responding to FOIA requests a major component when developing the agency's records management system and workflows. OGIS will continue to evaluate the adaptation of the best practices when conducting our agency and issue assessments. So I hope that provided some clarity on OGIS's efforts to forward the best practice recommendations of the previous committee. Moving to the recommendations, there has been progress regarding 3 specific recommendations. Of the 8 recommendations we've been tracking, 4 are complete. 1 is basically complete pending action of NARA's FAR representative, and 3 will be launched next year. There is one change in recommendation number 2. This recommendation was completed when the question regarding leveraging technology was included in the CFO report. Now that the report has been published, OGIS analyzed the responses. As I mentioned earlier, OGIS published on July 31st of this year an assessment on leveraging technology to improve Freedom of Information Act searches. This assessment is published on the OGIS website. Our assessment showed that 86% of respondents to the CFO annual report questions indicated that they were leveraging some sort of technology to facilitate efficiency in conducting searches. I urge you to examine our assessment for more in-depth analysis. Regarding recommendation number 3, as I have reported previously, OGIS drafted a business case and submitted it to NARA's FAR Council representative. We're actually meeting tomorrow to finalize that draft, so it will be ready for submission to the Council. And finally, recommendation number 1, as you know, the Technology Subcommittee of the Chief FOIA Officers Council was created about a year ago. They have been working diligently, and the subcommittee presented before the Chief FOIA Officers Council in August. We're fortunate to have the 2 co-chairs from the Technology Subcommittee here today to discuss their work. So I'm going to move on to introduce our visitors next, but I wanted to take a second just to ask if anyone had any questions regarding the status of the recommendations. No questions? Great. So I'm very pleased to welcome the co-chairman of the Technology Subcommittee. Eric Stein is the director of the Office of Information Programs and Services at the State Department. His office is responsible for the department's records management, FOIA, the Privacy Act, classification, declassification, library, and other records and information access programs. That's a lot. Michael Sarek is the Veterans Health Administration FOIA Director. He leads a FOIA program with over 300 FOIA Privacy Act officers, handling 25,000 plus requests across 151 facilities worldwide. In addition to his work on the CFO Technology Subcommittee, Michael was recently appointed as the Vice Chair of the American Bar Association's Government Information and Right to Privacy section. So thank you and welcome. And I'm going to get your slides up here.
Great, thank you.
Let's go forward your own slides.
Okay, do you want to keep them?
I'm on the line. I apologize.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Stein.
And I'm Michael Sarich.
We're the co-chairs of the IT Subcommittee, the Chief FOIA Officers Council. As mentioned, we spent about the past year reviewing IT practices at federal agencies, soliciting feedback from various groups, ASAP, the Chief CIO Council, the Federal CIO Council, the Chief FOIA Officer Council, and then we're here today. This is the end of our tour. And there's what's coming out of these efforts will be recommendations that we'll be talking about today, going into a little bit more detail than we went into at the Chief FOIA Officer Council meeting. Just want to start out by saying thank you to the National Archives, to OGIS, to OIP, and to all of you here with us today here, on the phone, and online. So if we can go to the next slide. What we've been working on is over the past, since December, almost a year now though, just short, recommendation that came from all of you to create a subcommittee. And we formed a diverse subcommittee of about a dozen agencies, ranging very small to large cabinet level agencies, diverse record types, anything from forms, reporting data, classified information, which gets into an area of declassification and other challenges. And we have heard that there are diverse issues on technology. When you talk about technology, today we're going to drill down and get more specific with regard to what are we talking about? Because people hear technology. I heard search mentioned before, but there's also case processing. There's how do we work in this new electronic era as we transition to more electronic records, as we declassify or move things electronically, what else could be publicly released and save time? But records management has really been the foundation of a lot of what we found. So here we just go through and show how we're here today. If we go to the next slide, Mike. In September, we were asked to co-chair this body. We've been doing that, Mike and I together. And here's a list of the agencies that have been participating. There's been a richness based on the diversity of this group. And we've seen, we came to the table with a bunch of assumptions, a lot of which were proved to be false. So we had to then go back and really listen carefully to the needs of agencies. For example, you get up here talking about how we're leveraging AI and new tools to search records at some federal agencies, but then a smaller agency says, yeah, but I need a scanner just to digitize records. And some people may be shaking their heads, you're kidding me, right? Well, no, they're really trying to comply with the law, and that's what they need. So you have this range out there. So by trying to figure out first, like, well, we have this figured out. We're going to go with large agencies. We're going to look at what the IT landscapes are. And we have these great ideas and solutions, and we had to take a step back and really listen carefully to what these agencies had to say, and we learned quite a bit. So with that, and speaking of learning quite a bit, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to talk about how we went about assessing the landscape out there, including reading the previous committee's report and recommendations to get a baseline of work that's already been done so we didn't reinvent the wheel. So Mike?
Great, thank you, Eric. And again, it is a real thrill and an honor to be here today with this body, especially as we send Melanie off into a happy retirement. Through my whole career, Melanie's always been that exemplar, that go-to for FOIA, and it's going to be a great miss, not seeing you there. But we'll always have your example and your memory and your legacy will carry on for years to come. So, thank you. So, as Eric mentioned, we had three major mandates here. We had to first study the use and deployment of FOIA across the agencies. Basically, we're trying to get a snapshot of who's doing what, who's using the scanner, who's doing predictive AI, where are we at in the field. And then, as Eric mentioned, we found an incredible diversity in the field. Some folks doing things with ink and pen. Some people, Sharpies and photocopiers, and other folks with really advanced, robust systems. And we're going to talk a little bit about that sort of digital divide that we have in the field. All of the programs, we're all under the same mandate. We all have the same requirements. We all have to process it under the same deadlines and produce the same amount of records. 3 requests, we still have to post them. We all have the same job to do, but the resources are spread dramatically across different agencies. And we found in research that chance plays a role in terms of where a program is located in relation to the technology that it has. So for example, if you're in a general counsel shop, then you may be encouraged to use e-discovery software because that's what the other folks in the office are doing, versus if you're in a record shop or a different shop, you may have access to different technology that's more career or more field specific in that field. So that was really interesting. Where people sit determines what they see and what access they generally have, and that'll get into some of our recommendations, our thematic recommendations later in the presentation. But the major takeaway from this first portion to study the landscape of FOIA was that there's a huge market for improvement. People out there are working very hard and they want to be the best. They want to make sure that they're getting requests out in a timely manner. They don't want their agency to be looked at in a negative way. In some ways, FOIA can be a public relations issue for some folks, right? They want to make sure that they're getting their information out quickly and that they're being responsive to their requester community. And one thing that we've seen for sure in this process is that if we keep doing the same things that we've been doing with the same level of resources, we're going to get less satisfactory results in the long term. Requests are increasing in complexity, litigation throws sand in the gears of operations, things become more and more difficult over time. So we must embrace technology, we must embrace new techniques and methodologies if we are going to continue to on the course of improvement that we're all seeking here in this profession. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric to talk about some of the best practices that we found before we move into some of the more thematic, broad-based recommendations for the profession.
So the committee met at least once, if not twice a month, to discuss how we're going to approach these tasks. The first, Mike and the team went through every single Chief FOIA officer report to look at where different agencies were and what they've reported. We then also took the experiences of our members on the committee to understand what real problems do we have within the agencies, but that's very insular. We also thought of the public, and those of you outside of agencies, what issues do you have? Most of the time it's we want our information faster. And I can tell you from what we've seen, agencies really are working to do their best, but the best is different. So we're getting to best practices, and what does that mean? It's easy to say, well, we have this great e-discovery tool, here you go, just go buy it and you're all done. It really came down to understanding what are the process problems and what are the needs of the agency? What type of records do they maintain? And that's probably the biggest point and takeaway, is that there will not be one-size-fits-all solutions. And the more we looked at this, is if we're looking at FOIA IT, we're really looking at a broad range of issues, which is why our recommendations, and there will be several, will touch on all of these points. Because whether you're looking for contemporary reporting, something that a major cabinet-level agency does, on a topical issue, or something that really matters to you personally because it's a privacy matter or related to you individually, we didn't put weight as to who's more important. We looked at what are the issues and how do we resolve them. So identifying best practices. Well, the first one, and I mentioned this before, is not, you're going to say, well, wait a minute, you're an IT group, what are you talking about? It's records management matters. And going to the June 2019 memo, that's going to be very helpful in framing how agencies move forward. What electronic records do you have available? It also gets to making sure FOIA programs and records officers and records programs understand one another and what they're doing, and understand what agencies already offer publicly, and have really assessed what are they getting FOIA requests for, and have they leveraged and put their resources in place in such a way that align with the tools and technology that allow for processing. We found that sometimes, again, this doesn't sound like a technology recommendation, but it is. We'd ask agencies, did you ask for more resources? Did you ask to pivot? Have you put in place, have you reviewed your contracts? Have you reviewed, and some of them said yes, some of them said no. So just starting with records management matters, and I think that's something everyone here agrees with, so we'll move on. A point that came up, and we'll touch on this later, is that having champions within agencies matter, senior level officials, and what does that mean? Some people think it means the secretary or cabinet level official. It could be your CIO. It really depends on, as Mike said, where your FOIA operation is. Yeah. But having senior level buy-in matters, because it says to the workforce, this is serious. We take this seriously, and you should too. The other things we found is interoperability between records tools and FOIA case processing tools matter. And what we found is several agencies are using several different tools. They're not interoperable. And as a result of that, you have these piecemeal solutions. Well, we use tool A to do our case processing, but we use tool B for the redactions, we use tool C, and then afterward, we release it to the requester, but they don't publish them online, for example. Years ago at State, we adopted release to one, release to all, and we used that not just in technology, but also to say to requesters, have you checked our FOIA website? So that's another thing, leveraging technology like websites. How do you post more records online? And a lot of that, the agencies have means of doing so, although some don't. And some have said it's great that you feel like you have that support, but we may not. So the flip side is publishing records online, a lot of agencies haven't considered doing that yet. And there's this aversion, well, if you're going to release everything online, you're going to release something you shouldn't.
Right.
Well, our view has been, we're not doing our jobs then.
Right, exactly.
That's why the exemptions exist.
Right.
In looking at other best practices and recommendations, we had interoperable tools. We also needed to understand, again, looking at problems, which problems we're trying to solve. We talked about records, we talked about case processing, we talked about redaction. We'll be looking at, and I'll segue now over to Mike, recommendations that are meaningful. And probably the biggest one that's going to come out of this group is having some sort of body and opportunity for agencies or group that agencies that really want to make change and improve can reach out to. I think that's partially what OGIS and OIP do, but given their mandates and demands, we found that instead of saying, agencies, you must adopt one of these 6 practices, those that are serious about change don't even know where to start. And one small agency, after the Chief FOIA Officer Council meeting, came up and said, that's great, all this stuff you're talking about is wonderful. However, we just need a simple redaction tool, and I'm not even sure about how to get that. And I appreciated that feedback, and the agency preferred not to be named, so that's fine. But it's creating an environment where people are willing to talk, and that also matters from hearing from the public perspective. Are you getting information the way you want, the means you want it in a timely manner? And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to talk about the recommendations we've been looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eric. There's a number of additional recommendations that will be in in our forthcoming paper. One in particular that we talked about before we transition to the broader thematic recommendations is leveraging the budget cycle, making sure that you make the opportunity. Frequently, you'll go and you'll ask for something and you'll get rebuffed, and then that's it, right? But try again. And especially at this time of year when money's getting swept and budgets are getting consolidated, when you're in this business for a few years, you learn that there is pots of money that need to get used. If you have a project that's prepared, shovel ready, if you will, shovel ready FOIA programs and improvements, this is a great opportunity. So kind of strike while the iron's hot, understand the dynamics in your agency in terms of where the money is, how you can kind of leverage that, and keep asking, keep knocking on the door until they say yes. You may not get the full request, but through time you will get more. So working through the objectives of the committee, our sense was the best practices that Eric outlined and the realistic recommendations I'm about to share and Eric is going to share really is going to be the value that's going to come, because we really wanted to make sure that we had actionable tools for people, things that people could actually take away from this and really make a difference in their FOIA programs. And the themes of these three recommendations, and again, recall that we're going from large to small. These are things that everyone can do, no matter the size of your agency. The first thing, thematically, is we're going to talk about leveling the playing field for folks in terms of access to information, access to programs. Then we're going to talk about, as Eric previewed a little bit, lending a hand. How are we going to help those folks get to where they need to be and where they want to be? And then finally, something that I'm very passionate about, and that's sharing the word, and that's spreading the information, the success stories, because really, when you look deeply into what's going on into the FOIA world, it's a good news story. It's not being portrayed necessarily as frequently as a good news story as I think it should be, but I think we can get there. And I think we can do that by sharing the word. So
I would just add, in as much as there's good news stories, there are real challenges as well.
Yeah.
And so part of these fora to discuss those challenges in a meaningful way where people put their guards down and we really can get to what's the core issue, not the one up here, because you waste all this time discussing this when really the problem's been down here.
Yeah. And one of the great things to talk about starting to level the playing field is that when we have these meetings, on our subcommittee level, some of the greatest conversations come from kind of the side talk before and the after. I think, as you guys can all appreciate, when we talk and we learn about the way things are going on at different agencies. So one of the things that we found in reviewing the reviewing reports is that there's no fewer than 26 unique programs and platforms used in the FOIA world that people have self-reported, and these range from the whole world of usual suspects, the commercially available off-the-shelf products, the normal office suites of different products, to homegrown systems that folks are in the process of either updating, replacing, or moving forward on. And because programs exist in different locations in an organization with differing levels of support, some folks have a real challenge in terms of going out. They know what they need, or they may not even know what they need to start off with, right? And they have a real challenge in making that argument and moving forward. So one of the things that we had a great opportunity to meet with the CIO Council, and we talked about working with and partnering with GSA to have a kind of a minimum standards or benchmarks for what these programs should and can and must indeed do to successfully manage a FOIA program. And so a big way to kind of level the playing field is going to be to get these programs, or work to get these programs, on a GSA schedule. So every federal agency will have access to these. It doesn't matter if you have 50 or 50,000 cases, you have the same access to the same state-of-the-art technology at a price point that makes sense for both the agency and for the taxpayer. So having that records management software, having those FOIA products available. And when I circle back to sharing the word, I'll talk a little bit more about access to these programs, access to this technology, and finding out about that. But we're going to transition and talk about the second theme, and Eric's going to talk about this, about lending a hand. How are we going to help those folks out there in the smaller agencies? How are we going to make sure, I'm at a very big agency, the second biggest agency in the federal government in terms of people. 9 million veterans, we're doing stuff every day. I have resources. I can do things, right? How can I help the other agencies, the smaller requesters? So Eric's going to talk about what our committee determined and some possible next steps for how we can lend a hand.
Yeah, and I think if you go to the, excuse me, if you go to the next slide,
Yeah.
tomorrow is today.
Yeah.
Every day that passes is another opportunity that we're missing to move forward and move in these directions. If Mike, did you want to go back to the
No, you're good.
Okay. So the
Okay.
no, sorry, go slide 6.
Oh. Okay.
How best to lend a hand. We've talked about creating an environment where agencies can talk. We've talked about several agencies did express interest in understanding better what are their options. And so, as Mike had mentioned, creating a venue or an opportunity where we can discuss here's what we've learned and coming up with these custom tailored solutions to agencies. It doesn't have to be hundreds of tailored solutions, but maybe buckets or groupings, because there are relevant, there's overlap in the issues among a lot of the agencies. So how to best lend a hand, it's creating an environment, where do I go? And I think we've been saying, well, you can go to OGIS,
Right.
and OGIS can reach out to us, or we could work. So that's, as we look at the next steps for this group, this subcommittee, these groups tend to exist and then they can linger and go on forever. Our plan is to sunset at some point, and the question becomes, after we draft these recommendations this month, what, if any, role does this type of group have moving forward, and what, if anything, do we need to provide to agencies? So how to best lend a hand? I mean, first was just getting, and Mike will talk about getting the word out, letting them know, well, what's available, and let's talk about that for a minute. Sometimes just hearing what the issues are and then saying, have you thought about contracting out a solution instead of developing one in-house? We've had this one forever, we love the solution, but we have our backlogs growing, we're not able to keep up with demand. Well, have you teased that out a bit and thought about it? What's the issue? We can't find these records, or we're getting, now the bigger challenge we're seeing is we're inundated with records, a lot of
Right.
agencies.
Yes.
Those that have adopted technology for
Right.
e-records are finding a lot of non-responsive material, and that really slows down the FOIA process as you're working through, you're doing searches, and so you're having these overly broad requests that come in that are, I want everything on this one word, and you're getting a lot. How do we better have a dialogue with the public and requesters and understanding what exactly you're looking for? Because really, we and the agencies we talk to want to respond.
Right.
And this isn't so much a technology issue, because some groups we talked to said, well, the technology will take care of it, AI. I have not seen any AI that's quite there yet to do what people expect it to do right now. So it's rather coming up with the use cases, the examples. What can we do now to find results? And I know, for example, what we're doing is making our e-record solution interoperable with FOIA Express, be able to port those records over and then find and work through them that way. It was another way of looking at things. So one of the things, how to lend a hand, looking at the requirements of agencies. We found some federal agencies actually went through the exercise of understanding whether their FOIA programs are centralized or decentralized and gathering the requirements for their program. For our intake, excuse me, we need to do this, this, and this. For our search of records, we need to do this, that, and that. Those that had actually listed out core requirements are actually moving faster and understand better what the issues are and the solutions they need. So we found those other agencies that are struggling hadn't even considered that. And I think some of it comes from people who are so busy and overwhelmed trying to comply with mandates and increasing demands of just request volume, litigation, electronic records, that they don't take time to pause and then think about these things. So it's helpful to have feedback and recommendations from a group like this, where you're coming at it from a different angle and just taking the time, which doesn't sound like much, but it really does matter to think about these issues and then figure out how do we bridge these gaps. So how to best lend a hand. The recommendations I listed previously went through will be written up. Our plan is to finalize that draft this month. And part of that will also be a series of recommendations and then some practical solutions. And I think Mike's going to talk about some of those in terms of how to best share the word and next steps.
Right, so we have 100 plus agencies doing this work and they're working hard every day, right? So in some ways you have 100 plus people trying to invent a wheel every day, right? But there's a lot of people that have really well working wheels that spin and things work. There's lots of success stories, Securities and Exchange Commission, other agencies that are really getting it done. How do we share those? How do we share that word? I used to think that I knew that I was really in the loop with things. But then when I got involved in this committee and really started to have some dialogue and do really deep dives in agency processes and looking at processing manuals and looking at SOPs and how agencies do things and how some agencies embrace technology and how they don't, there's a whole world out there that, as Eric mentioned, most folks, frankly, don't have the time to maybe study another agency. You're busy studying your agency, figuring out how to make your wheel spin a little bit faster and how to grease the axle a little bit to move your requests out in those 20 days. And as Eric mentioned, having champions in the FOIA community. Melanie's always been my FOIA champion. I've always looked to OIP for guidance in terms of, what is the best practices? What is the guidance on this issue? Where do I look for people? Mike Marquis, I looked at his processing to see how can I, bring these great techniques, this intelligent case management, to make sure that I'm assigning cases properly. And I'm someone that's invested a lot of time to learn that. Our job, I think, is with the modalities of communication that we have now, it's almost criminal not to be able to spread that word and share that word in the FOIA community and show those exemplars and say, look, it is possible to get these out. Other people are doing it. So it's in some ways you can't just cut and paste because you don't have the same resources, but there's going to be good ideas in those programs, right? You're going to be able to take some intelligent case management ideas from Mike Marquis. You're going to be able to pull some things from SEC. You're going to be able to pull these in this kind of palette of colors and paint your own picture for your own program. But you're not going to be able to do that unless we get better as a field in sharing that word. So there's been some discussions in the committee in terms of, well, how about having something like a FOIA FOSSI? There used to be something called a federal FOSSI where people would come in and people that had programs that would help you in your field, they would come in and they would present them. And so working with industry to see how we can make that happen while staying, of course, in line with contracting procedures and ethics and et cetera. But we found that through that technology and sharing that word, we can sharpen our processes and refine our operations, and we can make that improvement through innovation because, frankly, we don't have 100 more people bursting down the door at the Veterans Health Administration to come and process FOIAs. So we have to have a solution. And one of the great things about working in this field and working on this technology subcommittee is access to those ideas and to be able to bring those innovations. So I'm going to be able to bring those to the Veterans Health Administration. Eric's certainly bringing them to the State Department every day. We want to, for those other 100 plus, we want to make sure that they're also getting benefit from that and that we're able to kind of share the word. And in doing that, we'd like to transition to engaging this body in a discussion on how you guys think we can best level the playing field, how we can best lend a hand, and how we can best share the word. Because as Eric mentioned, our report is pretty robust at this point, but it can always benefit from the expertise of a panel like this. So if we could transition to that.
Sure, and the only final, just a closing point, in looking at FOIA process, how agencies process FOIA requests, it's also understanding the staffing you have and available. A lot of agencies have 306 government information specialist employees. Some use attorneys. And I'd mentioned in the past, at state we're going to start leveraging librarians to help do searches. Who better to find information than people who are trained to find information? So especially as we move into this sea of electronic data it's overwhelming. So in looking at data scientists, looking at the different job series, and then when you get into the contract, how is a contract written with the statement of work? What exactly are you asking for? What services, tools, et cetera? So the needs will vary, and there needs to be flexibility for agencies to maintain their own autonomy to manage how they're organized for their programs. But they're sharing these ideas sometimes just leads to, oh, well, that's what they're doing. It doesn't work for us, but I never thought of doing it this way ourselves.
Exactly.
So with that, yes, we're very interested in anything, any thoughts, feedback, anything we covered. Otherwise, we open it up. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, so as Eric and Mike said, they're definitely very interested in our feedback, our reactions. Anyone have any questions that they are dying to ask? And that includes folks on the phone. Just speak up. Sometimes it takes a minute for people to.
Yes, of course.
Melanie, go ahead.
Hi, Melanie Pastay. Thank you both. I want to just say I think that your work's been really excellent, and it's just captured so many of the things, of course, that you said they resonate with me so clearly. But particularly, I like the idea of recognizing that there isn't a one-size-fits-all.
Right.
We really, there just isn't, because the diversity of the FOIA landscape is so vast. But at the same time, being able to pick and choose, and that was a beautiful way of saying it, like to draw your own painting, was, to the extent we can share the colors with
Right.
one another.
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's really for the overall benefit of FOIA. So thanks very, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the opportunity. The members of the committee that aren't here, I'd be remiss if I didn't discuss the robust contributions of the more than a dozen agencies and groups that we've been able to benefit from. So to have that large of a sample size of agency operations for people to share their firsthand experiences in doing this work, day in, day out, every day, and how they're meeting their mandate and working with requesters has really just been fantastic in terms of a FOIA professional's own career development, in terms of learning.
Yeah.
And it was after those meetings we discussed some of the issues we were having, and that helped us go back and maybe think at our own, I know in our agency, why are we doing it that way?
Exactly. And just the opportunity to have agencies, as Eric discussed, that have taken the time to do those line-by-line need-based analysis of what exactly do we need. That intellectual exercise, to use the resources to create a product at the end of the day. You say, hey, look, contractor, hey, whoever, this is what we need. Can you do this? Really makes you refine your own processes. It really makes you think, what do I really need? Because I'm going to be paying for this. If I don't really need it, why am I going to pay for this, right?
So we've been asked a lot, well, who's leveraging AI and how are they using it? And what we found so far is mainly in records programs. I have not seen, correct me if you've seen, a FOIA program leverage it yet to do advanced redactions or anything. But I think we're at a point now where we're starting to understand how the technology works, and how it works in federal agencies and in their IT landscapes and where we're moving. And so I know, for example, I've seen firsthand what machine learning is capable of doing. It's very promising, both from a records perspective, and that only would reinforce FOIA programs and any other program for access to to records.
Yeah, Melanie, again, we're at the very, very beginning stages within OIP of exploring AI. We want to, as we usually do, we really like to try things out so that we get some hands-on experience first. And obviously AI is so promising, and the idea of being able to have any sort of assistance with processing being done electronically would be really a huge game changer. But you're right, it isn't just, it's very difficult and challenging. It isn't easily translatable yet to FOIA, but we're hoping as we get moving on our exploration of it, that then we'll be in a position to start sharing some things.
And this
But that's
explanation-
definitely the future.
And this exploration creates an opportunity to get employees comfortable with technology and AI, because people hear it and they think I'm going to lose my job, or this isn't going to. And in fact, it's like, you're welcome to continue combing through hundreds of thousands of non-responsive records if you'd like, or we could get to the actual material that people are looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and not to give away too much of a report, but that's part of sharing the word inside and outside. At the Veterans Administration, we have the first director of AI as a position. So first thing that I did was go talk to him and say, Dr. Lacazette, Mike Sarich, FOIA guy, here's an opportunity for you to get a program, to have an early success. How can you, work in this field and helping out? So it's sharing internally and externally, right? Like inside of our field, but also sharing up the chain and letting people know what your needs are. So, and I think more and more agencies, as Eric mentioned, are going to be in this field, right? More and more people are going to be.
It's really the frontier for us in FOIA.
Yeah, and when you're looking at resources, you have administration level, interest in AI. So if you can tie yourself to that, it's always a good thing.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to say, again, thank you for all your work. And as co-chairs, Melanie and I definitely look forward to your report. Please hurry up before she retires. But I think Jason has a question or a comment?
Question.
Or maybe both.
Eric, Michael, I'm heartened by your
Jason
message
Barron.
here
Jason
about technology, and I think if you stick around for the rest of the meeting, you'll see that you're channeling the thoughts of our own subcommittee that Ryan and I are on in many ways. What I didn't hear during the presentation here is an outreach to the private sector, which is filled with solution providers, both for FOIA and e-discovery on AI and machine learning. And so I guess the question is, would we expect as part of your recommendations to encourage agencies to do RFIs or some kind of outreach to that community to tap their expertise and to have things like vendor days or some kind of industry day where you're interacting and you're getting the best thoughts from that community?
So that's excellent. We could the RFI piece in particular, I think making sure agencies are clear, they understand what RFIs are, and that it's somewhat innocuous, and having vendors come in. One thing we did discuss with the agencies, and we did hear, is that's great, Eric and Mike, you have all these ideas. All you're going to show us are tools that we're not going to be able to buy. Right. We don't have the money, we don't have the resources. Right. So we said, well, that's not really a great approach. How about we see what's out there, and have you thought about partnering with another agency, interagency agreements, finding ways to leverage resources across the government in new and innovative ways, instead of just saying, well, no, that's not going to work. So I think we could definitely incorporate the RFI or some sort of proposal. In terms of feedback, we have presented at ASAP. We have received some feedback, but we have not done an outreach, because we were trying to understand what are the needs of the agencies and in that incorporate. But I think there's definitely value added from not just the private sector, but the public as well.
I also have a follow-up. Did I hear you say that the technology subcommittee is sunsetting? And if so...
We're not letting them sunset. They did not ask us for permission.
We're going to solve it and go away.
Explain to me why it wouldn't be a continuing mandate for the government to avail itself of a technology subcommittee on an ongoing basis.
I think we're very open to that, but I think also a lot of subcommittees and groups just look to perpetuate their own existence for a long time. And so what we'd like to do is come up with a recommendation. We understand we serve bodies. Those bodies have to make a decision. And if that's the decision, I know Mike and I have discussed whether we would stay on in this role or how that would work. We're very open to it, but we thought it was presumptuous to say we'll just do this forever because it's needed.
Well, speaking only for myself, I would be happy to make a recommendation coming out of this committee that the technology subcommittee continue.
Well, I understood exactly what you were saying about, and I commend you for saying that you see your work as obviously in no way saying that technology then will be like, okay, we've solved technology for FOIA. Obviously, we're never going to, when you think of how far we've come. Right. But I understand the wisdom of saying, we're doing a discrete thing, and then we'll take the next challenge as its own thing.
And we have a wonderful team, but we are pulling from resources from agencies.
Sure.
And while it's been a nominal commitment of time, it still is a commitment of time.
Of course.
But I know while there have been challenges and issues, we've actually enjoyed this, and it's been quite a great opportunity, and I'm very grateful that we've been able to do this.
For sure. Absolutely.
Other questions?
Oh, hi, this is Patricia West. I wanted to thank Eric and Michael for the presentation. Your point about getting leadership behind you is everything. I've been at agencies where we've had leadership support, and it makes such a difference. And then I've been at agencies when you don't, and it's night and day. But one thing I wanted to share, and it kind of follows up on Jason's point. I think Jason mentioned something about an industry day. And oftentimes when I go to the DOJ trainings or the DOJ working groups, that's the only time that, during a Q&A where some of the agencies can share the different technology that they're using. And I feel like we with the workload and everything, we get a bit isolated, and we don't know about all the other technology out there. And doing an RFI is great, but I would love to have something like what Jason said, like an industry day or a conference, or maybe that's something that ASAP could facilitate. Oftentimes they have vendors that come in, but I think the problem for us is we don't know everything that's out there, and it would kind of be nice to have it all under one roof so that all the agencies could see the possibilities, because we need help, and I think technology is the way to go.
And I think that's the value of a body like this, where we now have enough experience and understanding of what the landscape looks like to say, all right, here are the issues you're saying you have, but we're also hearing this and this, and we've seen it with those other agencies. Here's what they're doing, and then the next step would be, and here are the tools available, and making sure there's awareness.
Yeah, exactly. The different stovepipes, and one thing that I started my career at the Bureau of Land Management, so I try to be very aware of this. We're in D.C., and we think that everything is here, right? But there's a whole big, huge government worldwide, especially in the Veterans Health Administration case, doing FOIAs and doing this work all across the world, right? So we want to make sure that we're able to share the word with those folks that may be based in, say Denver or Los Angeles or San Francisco, or pick an American city where this work is also being done, to make sure that they also get the benefit from that. So that kind of industry day, that FOIA FOSSI, that kind of ability to get that word out is critical. We work in these stovepipes sometimes, and we're also busy that to have the opportunity to learn what is going on across the federal family is really critical if we're going to keep our programs moving. It doesn't do the field. It does my administration a great service if we improve the FOIA program at the Veterans Health Administration and the Veterans Administration, but it doesn't do that same service to maybe the Social Security Administration or a different administration, because we don't tell them about it, right? So having that industry day and sharing that word, I think, is critical moving forward if we're going to grow as a community.
Other questions on the phone? You guys are not very lively today. Come on, wake up. These guys came here to get feedback from us too, so.
So that brings us to this slide here. If you think of anything after the fact, you can email me and Mike and share that feedback. Next week we have a meeting where we really seek to, as Alina mentioned, wrap up our paper, get it, while it's robust, we also kept it robust yet succinct.
Yes,
Maybe people actually will read it,
Yes,
and then see what comes out of that in the next step. So we're submitting that to OIP and OGIS, and then waiting to hear next steps. In the meantime, we're very happy and welcome feedback we'd share with the group, and I know it's a really great team, and they welcome that.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. So we're super, super early because I expected a robust discussion with Eric and Mike. And so I'm going to go ahead and take a break, which would have been normally at 11:30, but we're going to just give you a little more time. So maybe let's come back at 11:20. Is that okay, Jason? Okay. So let's take a break. Just a reminder, if you want to purchase food or drink from Charters Cafe, which is located on this level, you may do so, but you can't bring it back in here. There are restrooms directly outside the theater, another set near the cafe. So please enjoy your break and talk amongst yourselves, and please be back here at 11:20. Thank you. I know.
I'm just going to go tell them how good they were.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, I didn't even get a folder. I didn't even get a folder. I usually get a folder. I didn't even get a folder.
Here's a folder. You want a folder?
No, it's okay. No, give it to Jason.
I get it. I gave him one. Are you pulling my leg? We're working on it.
Hi, Stephanie.
You live in the district. Because you don't make that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
We use something called litigation, and so we're trying, and she said right now is to roll it out in some was a concern.
Our everyday FOIA.
I had answers for
But some do.
14
So that's kind of where we're moving.
in two areas that she said. One of them was when FOIA applies to a legislature. You're really limited in being able to share drafts.
Yeah, I know. No, I think it's gonna go fine. I'm with you.
Which is great.
No, it's not.
Some parts of our agency use that. I never.
Okay. Legislature.
Right.
Inhibited
And we don't have any tool that
share
does that.
draft proposals
Duplicating
with
tool, it's insane.
effective
We
groups
have
outside
in-house created
without
case management system, and we have Adobe, and we have actually one thing we lack is the deduplicating. And it just shouldn't be that
a
hard.
draft bill. It's clearly not ready for prime time.
Adobe
And,
Pro,
you know,
or some
and it
special
would be,
Adobe that does it.
you know, it could wind up, as we've seen in many cases, too early a disclosure before things are, have been vetted by experts can be embarrassing and can wind up undermining the possibility of getting it. If the result being, your option is either not to get that kind of feedback, or to have people come in and not take credit. I mean, it's
Right.
I didn't have an answer for that.
And the question, so the question is how, what,
Well, the question
how
is,
can you account for this in the law?
right, is there a fix?
Right.
And I told her that in exchange for they're considering, the DC law is outdated, we've been trying for 5 years now.
And it applies to the council.
Absolutely. And it turns out in most states, the law does apply.
Not in New Jersey.
Understand that's not your
This is, but
Yeah.
that makes it,
But
that
that's-
makes it a generic issue that they can.
Yeah.
So that's
But
one.
that's interesting. Okay.
The second one is much more universal. And that is, there are two kinds of stories that they find unreasonably challenging. One is the requester who really is intent on the
same situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to think I've been doing this now for a long time, and other than now, we've gone to a lot of time for
they may or may not be frivolous, but somebody who's just pissed off at the agency or doesn't think the agency is being honest with them and uses FOIA as a weaponized FOIA. The other
less hard copy paper.
subhead is the
There's no paper.
legitimate request that is clearly overly broad because the requester doesn't want to disclose what she's looking for. The journalist who asks for all emails to and from Administrator Johnson for a 2-year period.
So it's not that people don't know how to write requests, they know, but
And they call them up and say, would you narrow your request? And they said, no, because, well, would you tell us who you're interested in? Well, in fact, we know this is the case. He's interested in finding out what lobbyists did. But he doesn't want to, he doesn't know all of it, so he can't ask the recipient of the email. He doesn't have any idea what they did. And so, but he's pretty sure that this administrator probably, if not corrupt, certainly feeding only lobbyists for one side of the issue, and using a fishing expedition to find out. And
I was thinking I would say it.
both of those kinds of requests are troublesome, and there's not much you can, under most current laws, there's not much you can do about it except wring your hands and, slow walk them, use fees, and what that does is piss them off. For the weaponized request, it escalates.
Right.
Unless it's so bad that you get a court order that says you got to respond to it. And for the fishing expedition, mean, the law, I gave you an example of our representative that wanted all of the EPA information that they had on the certain chemicals. All of them. General counsel's office, science office, policy office, field offices, and so on. And they came back and said, you're talking about a year's worth of work. It's going to cost over $100,000 or so. When do you start? I mean, we were concerned that their finding on these chemicals would put us out of business, my client out of business. And, you know, they had a lot more at stake than $100,000. And so we said, we would like a rolling response. We will pay as we go. We understand the difficulty. It's a very precise request. We know exactly what we're looking for. You don't have to. There's a chemical name of the substance and the common name of the substance. So we don't really care for anything that doesn't have that name. And you know, so I said that's the sort of thing that clearly the FOIA does contemplate, because you know, as it turns out, the agency was planning to ban it and couldn't because they didn't have solid enough scientific evidence. And rather than have to go through a ban and then challenging that fact and pursue it and losing market shares and bad publicity, we were trying to preempt the strike. You know, I felt as an open government buff was totally appropriate, even though the agency, EPA went crazy.
So the question is,
how do you distinguish that from the journalist who is a serious, I believe I know Scott Pruitt, Ryan Zinke, who's doing some dastardly deeds, but I don't know what. It turns out I'm right, but I have to make a very FOIA request.
and how is that different though from the local gadfly, who may also have a legitimate issue?
It is. That's why.
So there's
That's what
we have some of those in New Jersey.
That's what the city council
You
is
know
up
what?
to.
These
Dorothy
guys might be
Brazel.
crazy, but they're also right.
We have, one of the guys on my board. He's retired. He used to be with the ACLU. He's a lawyer. You know, but his hobby is he'll read something in the paper and say, oh, that's a FOIA request. Or if he hears a local, ANC member has been denied request for some information, he'll immediately file a FOIA request. They all know him. He's totally smart, focused, and that's not the kind of thing people want. They may not like it, but that's not the problem. The problem is there are a lot of them.
Sure.
So those are my two.
And so you said,
I'm looking for best practices or legislative fixes, or is there something we can do without undermining the basic right to information? And you certainly can't leave it to the agencies to do this subjectively.
yeah.
All right.
I don't have anything in my pocket, but if
Okay.
I,
You don't have pockets.
I do, but I will, I'll keep my ears open and
Yeah, one of these days I'll move back into.
trust.
Your circle of trust. I am going to control this for the next 2 slides, and then I'm going to pass it around to you, and you will be in control of it for your slides, unless you want me to maintain control. Okay, and if I'm not like awake enough or something, if I just. Well, then I'll just tell you. Then you'll just say, next slide. Okay.
Ooh. All
Are the mics on? Oh, yeah, they are. So we're gathering back, everyone. Folks on the phone, if you could re-engage, we would very much appreciate that.
Hi, Alina. Bill here. Hello, Michael.
This is Ginger.
Yeah.
Lizette's here too.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. We sent them a draft.
I know that.
I know. It's very frustrating.
Just
I
like a
can't.
follow-up. But
I totally understand.
It's the squeaking wheel situation. Maybe Melanie can ask for it too. Is it going away for us?
Yeah.
For OMB.
OMB fee guideline update.
That's fine. No, that's fine. We can take the fees.
All right, so I think we're back. Glad that we have a little more time today for the subcommittee reports. And are folks back on the phone? Is everyone there? Do we have Abby?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Abby. Ginger?
Yep,
Okay.
I'm still here.
Hi, Ginger, thanks. James, are you still here?
I'm still here, thanks.
Okay. Lizette?
Right here.
Great. Michael?
I'm here.
Okay. Patricia?
Hello, I'm here.
Okay, great. And Emily?
I'm here.
Emily, are you still there?
Sorry, I'm here.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to do the roll call. So we're back. Hopefully everyone enjoyed their break. And I just want to thank everyone just very, very much for all the great work that the subcommittees are doing. I know everyone's been working very, very hard. And I'm very much looking forward to the reports of each of the subcommittees. A lot of the work has been conducted between meetings, and that's very, very important to the work of the whole committee. So I am going to switch things up a little bit from the published agenda because the Records Management Subcommittee, Ryan and Jason, actually have a lot to present, and I want to give them the opportunity to have time to present and time to get questions and comments from the rest of the committee. With that, I'm just actually going to flip it on its head and first would invite to hear from the Vision subcommittee co-chairs. And I believe that's Chris today, since Joan is not here, correct?
That's correct.
And you're going to update us on where you are and raise any issues you would like for the committee to hear.
Absolutely. And again, Chris Knox. And this will be quick in the interest of time and ceding some time to records management. As discussed in the previous committee, we broke our subcommittee down into 4 distinct work streams in order to facilitate our mission of a shared vision for the future of FOIA. Those 4 work streams are raising the priority of FOIA within the executive branch and agencies. That's led by Joan, who is not with us today. Reconsidering the model of OGIS within the FOIA community, and that's led by Patricia, who is on the phone. Managing expectations of FOIA between agencies and requesters, that's led by Kevin. And the need for increased and continued financial support for FOIA programs, and that's led by Michael on the phone. Since our last committee meeting, the majority of the work of the Vision Subcommittee has been focused on crafting, finalizing, and releasing our survey targeting FOIA agencies and requesters. That survey was launched at the ASAP training in July. Kevin has been instrumental in leading that survey and the responses, and I'm going to let him provide an update on that in just one second. In addition, the priority work stream led by Joan is planning upcoming interviews with those on this committee. We have not finalized the structure of that, what that's going to look like. That's over the next couple of weeks. And then Patricia and her role with the work stream focusing on OGIS's role in the FOIA community. They've done thorough research into OGIS, and they're moving on to look at other bodies doing similar work. They're looking at state, federal, and international ombudsmen, and they plan on bringing that research back to the subcommittee for digestion and recommendations back to this committee. So Kevin, if you have a minute to take over the update on the surveys, please.
Yeah, thank you. So this will also double dip a little bit because we're implementing this survey as part of the time volume subcommittee, these 2 surveys. And I would be remiss if I didn't also thank Sarah for helping to write some of the questions on. Oddly, as a member of the requester committee, I wrote the agency officer questions. As an agency officer,
that was great.
she wrote the requester questions.
Well, I also don't think it's unusual because
No,
I have a
it's
lot
not.
of questions. I would like to ask FOIA
That's kinda
requesters
what
that
we're
have been on my
thinking.
mind for a long time.
Exactly what we're thinking.
Finally got that opportunity.
And Bradley, Joan, Emily, and Michael helped edit a lot of them. And especially as we got more into the actual implementation, Suzanne was really useful in using her research and surveying knowledge and experience in putting these together, and we could not have gotten this done. So where we are now is we had put out, I think it was 12 questions to the agency officer community, as you said, mainly through the assistance of ASAP, with which Kirsten helped shepherd through, and 10 questions to the requester community, which Michael and others helped help us promote. We have, I believe it is, about 100 responses from the agency officers and almost 90 from the requesters, which I like. It's going to give us a strong base of information to work with, but not an unmanageable one. I think, we hope, and Suzanne and I were just talking about this a minute ago as to how we're going to now take what are, again, about 100 responses to 12 questions, i.e. 1,200 individual responses, and make sense of them. And on the other side, another 1,000 or so individual responses and make sense of them. But that is the next step. And remembering that what we're taking out of these, even though they were the same questions used by two subcommittees, what we're trying to pull out from them are two different things. So time volume, what we're going to be looking for in the responses are a little bit of here and now and a little bit of future, but geared toward what are the individual processes that are not working, that are working, and what will our recommendations be for, effectively, for lack of a better term, reducing backlogs. Managing expectations, we're hoping to find within the same responses the idea that, requesters think this and we can't do this. So there's a disconnect that is also causing problems. But so there's going to be overlap, but we're really hoping that we're getting information out of it that is going to answer two different questions for us at the same time. Then the next step will be, how do we make sense of all this? And we'll be talking about that I'm sure on both sides of the subcommittee, but I'm certainly going to work with Suzanne to find a way to make sense of these now magnitude of responses and bring them back to the greater subcommittees for kind of what we're going to do is hopefully pull out themes that then become recommendations.
And Kevin, you might have, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, is the survey closed on both
It
sides?
will be closed on Monday.
Okay.
Yeah, because ASAP actually had a privacy convention this week in Chicago, and we decided to leave it open. We originally had said we're going to shut it down right after Labor Day weekend, but then Claire reached out to me and said, hey, would you mind if we kept it open? I said, not at all. So let's do it.
So obviously, next steps is digesting that survey. That's going to feed the majority of the work that the work streams, the 4 work streams that we talked about, are going to be reviewing and digesting going forward. So.
Yeah, I mean, really what we're looking at for vision from this survey was, again, managing expectations. So again, you have some of these questions of, for instance, on the agency officer side, a couple of them were, can you identify any common areas of confusion among requesters? Well, that might be useful for time volume if an answer is, well, requesters just don't understand what it means to write a narrow request. But if we also get answers out of it that are more about managing expectations, the people just call us every day and don't understand how long it takes us to actually do one thing, to oversimplify these possible answers, then we're going to be able to use that and hopefully find these themes that come through. And if we do find 4, 5, 6, 7, we're going to plug those in try to use those as recommendations.
Absolutely.
Kevin, I just want to thank you for being a constant presence at the ASAP National Training Conference. You were there every day, and I think that was very helpful just to solicit and get folks to focus on the fact that there was a survey available for them to take. We obviously didn't force anyone. It was all voluntary.
Right.
But I think you did a great job just being there every day, so thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to reiterate that. Thank you, Kevin, and to Suzanne, Sarah, and Michael. They've really driven this survey through for us and really appreciate the work.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, anything else, Chris?
No, that's
okay.
it.
Any questions from the rest of the committee for the Vision Subcommittee? Any questions on the phone? Okay, it's very quiet today. Okay, so let's move on to time volume subcommittee, and I'm looking at Bradley because I can't look at Emily. Did you, the two of you, talk about who was going to present?
We did. This is Bradley here. We did, and our answer was Kevin.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
The survey was the biggest thing that our subcommittee had going on, and as you just heard, Kevin has described it.
Okay, that was the shortest report that I've ever heard.
Very succinct.
But now we have a lot of time.
We
for
have a lot of
Jason's
time for
recommendation.
records management subcommittee, so Ryan and Jason. So seriously, any questions for time volume? Any other issues you guys want to talk about? Any other comments from the folks on the phone for time volume? Going once, going twice, okay. Oh, yeah, please, James.
James Stoker, Trinity Washington University. The International Subcommittee has been meeting in the meantime, too, and maybe we haven't done a good job of reporting in since we just met yesterday. I'm not sure if Abby might want to say something about that because she wrote up some wonderful notes from our meeting, which I don't have in front of me just right now.
Sure, I can pull them up. So yes, we met on the phone last night, yesterday. We have been doing research on different countries' FOI laws since July, and we got together yesterday to discuss our findings. Everyone is currently in the midst of researching their countries, but we noted a couple of things that we have in common. One is that we're having trouble locating particular pieces of information related to budget and cost, and so we are going to reach out to those countries' FOIA offices directly to see if we can get that information. Some other things that we discovered is that most of the countries have fewer FOIA requests each year than the U.S., but it's still unclear to us whether this is because those countries have procedures for accessing information outside of the FOIA. And Ginger found out that in Chile, they have very stringent proactive disclosure provisions with a comprehensive list of what must be provided online and a requirement to update that information every 30 days. And then James found that in Switzerland, there's an accelerated appeal system that helps the parties reach an amicable resolution. So these three issues, we are thinking they form the basis of our recommendations. We plan on completing our research by the end of October. And that's all I have.
Okay, it sounds great. Thank you. Thanks, James. Okay.
Hello?
I'm sorry? Someone else on the phone?
Oh, that's all that I have. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Abby. Really appreciate that. Okay. No other time volume. We look forward to your next committee report, subcommittee report rather, at our next meeting. And it has to be more than 1 minute. I promised Jason and Ryan a lot of time, and I think you now have it. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have all pulled together. I know you've been working very hard, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm looking around. I know Lee and Tom are also on that subcommittee, so feel free to chime in. And Bradley, sorry about that. Yes, and James Jacobs is on the phone, yes. And I believe that Kirsten circulated and should also be in hard copy in your folders, assuming you have anything in your folders. The hard copy of what the subcommittee has pulled together. And does it look fairly similar to the one that we had circulated a couple weeks ago, or has it changed?
It has only changed in that we're presenting in the main 7 recommendations, not 8 here, for the full committee's consideration. I do hope that James on the phone has an opportunity to present his ideas about what might still be a recommendation, one or more. Can I just yield, if Ryan can yield to me for 1 second? I, as a point of privilege, I'd like to say something to Melody, which is that I don't know whether I'm going to be invited to your retirement party after.
I asked the same thing.
After this session, but I want to say that you are an unsung hero of the government. The Office of Information Policy, Dick Huff, Dan Metcalf, and yourself have been pillars for hundreds of agencies for decades. Government service of 30-something years. I had 33, and you said, what? 36. We work outside the spotlight. People don't know what you do. The FOIA handbook is used by thousands out there in the larger world, larger community. I point to it all the time in private practice with commercial requesters. And I say that the expertise is, unparalleled. And so I just want to say my own thank you for your public service, which has gone not unnoticed by some of us. So with that, Ryan is going to start us off. And then I think what Alina wanted us to do is rapidly kind of walk through the 7 recommendations just as kind of the, just to give a little précis or a summary of each, and then go back and for people to dive in on each one, but to sort of give the landscape, both for us and for the larger audience as to what the subcommittee has been recommending. So,
Yeah, and it can be done at a more leisurely pace. You
Yeah.
don't have to do it rapidly.
Yeah.
All right. So, hi, Ryan Law. So, thank you, Jason and Alina. And I'll second Jason's comments here, Melanie. The one thing I've learned from you and hope to aspire to do is every time you've appeared before Congress, you seem so calm and collected, and I hope I don't ever have to be in that position, but I aspire to be just like you in that regard, so thank you. The Records Management Subcommittee, since our last full meeting, has met 3 times, and we've been busy at work going through our recommendations. Have today planned to present 7 proposed recommendations, and we'll pause after each to collect your feedback and comments, and hopefully we have a good discussion. So I want to kick off by jumping right in and talking a little bit about recommendation 1. So as part of, you can go to the next one, Kirsten. And so our first recommendation is around agency handbooks. So Section G of the FOIA requires that agencies make available for public inspection electronic format a reference guide for the public. It also includes 3 requirements. So an index of agency information systems, a description of those major information systems and record locator systems maintained by the agency, and then finally a handbook for obtaining various types of information for the public. So these FOIA handbooks and reference guides are available on agency websites, and part of our process was to review many of those guides. And what we found is some agencies do it very well. Some agencies' handbooks, have not been updated in some time. We found that there were some agencies that provided really good information about their Privacy Act systems, but not a lot of information about their general records, about how records are maintained and stored by the agencies. So we felt this is an important recommendation because now that agencies are accepting requests via FOIA.gov, the FOIA handbook is one of the first things that the requester sees when they go onto FOIA.gov and they select the agency. The FOIA handbook is one of the first things they see. And so the stature, or the visibility of those handbooks has increased as a result. And so we looked to those guides or those handbooks, and we had several recommendations about, we wanted to ensure that agencies a recommendation will encourage DOJ and OIP to have agencies review their handbooks to ensure that they're up to date, that they meet the needs of their requester community, and to identify record systems and databases that are not limited to Privacy Act systems, to identify record schedules, and then importantly information about how email is stored at the agency, including information about Capstone. If agencies have adopted a Capstone approach to managing email records, identifying how those records are stored, and providing additional information to the public so they can submit tailored, specific, narrowed requests for information. And so our recommendations asked that we undertake a review and update of agency reference guides to ensure they're incorporating records management related guidance to increase their usefulness to the public. In addition to that, we feel that part of that should be that OIP should look at their FOIA website guidance to see if any tweaks or updates to there might support that effort. Similarly, the FOIA assessment toolkit might be an update to the toolkit for self-assessments that OIP's put together. Might be very helpful in helping agencies ensure that their handbooks are of greatest utility to their requester community. And then finally, to also report on their efforts to update their handbooks in upcoming Chief FOIA Officer reports. Similarly, I think OGIS also has an important role here in suggesting improvements and identifying best practices, calling out agencies that do reference guides very well and putting them on a pedestal for other agencies to see and to hopefully adopt some of their best practices. And then also in integrating records management features into FOIA guidance. We recently learned that the Administrative Conference of the United States adopted a recommendation which kind of helps our argument here around ensuring that agencies maintain on their websites information, informing the public about the availability of certain guidance documents and facilitating access to those records. And we feel that our recommendation here aligns closely to that. And then finally, maybe most importantly, as agencies are updating these guides, we feel it's very important that FOIA staff should collaborate with records management professionals and privacy professionals and others in their agency to ensure that that those perspectives are also conveyed to the public as well. Jason, what did I miss?
I think you got it.
So with each of these, I think we'll pause, see if there's any questions, comments, concerns from the group.
Sure.
Hi, this is Patricia Webb. So I just recently updated my FOIA homepage at NLRB. And a big thank you goes to Melanie and her office. I reached out to Bobby Talabian, and one of his folks, Karen Hopkins, was wonderful, and she went through our proposed new FOIA homepage and made wonderful comments. So I wanted to give her a shout out. But I guess I have a couple of comments. One, I think there's a difference between the FOIA handbook and the FOIA reference guide, or as I'm understanding it. When you say FOIA reference guide, you're referring to the FOIA reference guide that each agency has on their FOIA homepage. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And then the FOIA handbook, we also have our FOIA handbook online. It's a big bear of a document that lays out like the application of the various FOIA exemptions. I have to say, in my experience, I've never had a FOIA requester ever refer to our FOIA handbook. And usually I'm the FOIA public liaison for my agency right now. Usually I'll get phone calls and I will walk folks through our FOIA reference guide online and answer questions, but a lot of times I don't even think they read that. It's almost like when I go in to get my car fixed, I don't care what the mechanic does, just as long as it's running. And I think you guys have some, these are all things that are of interest to me as a FOIA professional, but I don't know that most of our FOIA requesters really care about how we store our email or how we store our records. I mean, in my final response letters, I always describe the search and what we did, but I don't think that the FOIA requester community really cares about that. Or I think the bottom line for them is, really get me the records I asked for. But I could be wrong. I have, folks here on this committee who are part of the requester community, so I will defer to them. And this is just my 2 cents worth. I find everything that you said of interest to me. And by the way, when I updated my FOIA website, we certainly contacted our records management officer as well as our privacy officer, and also had the help of my OCIO folks. So we did implement this, and I think that would be a great best practice. But anyway, those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Melanie. I can. I had a couple comments with this one. We typically use handbook and reference guide interchangeably. So I think most agencies have one thing that we certainly for FOIA.gov have just been using the term FOIA reference guide. But it's intended to be the document that agencies have been required for a long, long time to have, and that in the statute it says handbook, but we would just call it the reference guide. I really liked this idea. The couple things I had that just echoed exactly the comments we just heard. I think this is a perfect project to have input from the requester community as well as agencies in terms of like what features, what aspects of agency reference guides do people find the most helpful. Because we certainly learned when we were building FOIA.gov that requesters totally have that mindset of a Google search. They just want to type in a topic in a search bar. And so before we spend a lot of time having agencies list things and catalog things, if the requester community is not going to use that to make their requests, then we haven't really move the ball forward. So it seemed to me like this is a great project. We thought immediately when I read this, I thought, oh, we could do something sort of like what we did with the FOIA reg template. Have a group with both agencies and requesters, look at some examples. It would be great, like if OGIS could sort of do some screening and say, here's like 10 reference guides that look really terrific to us. Here's 10 that look very non-user friendly, and then we could kind of go from there. But I think there's a lot we can do to work with this. And then just to let you know, we purposely put the reference guides on front and center on FOIA.gov because we had the regs, agency regs there, but then we thought, oh gosh, does Aunt Betty that lives in Omaha really want to look at your FOIA regs? No, she'd rather look at something that's a Q&A that speaks in plain language. And so that's why we put both resources there.
This is Bradley White. I want to jump in and support this recommendation really quickly. I think it depends totally on who the requesters you're dealing with are. I know I spend an inordinate amount of time explaining to usually litigants rather than requesters what we have, where we store, how we're able to search those records, and what we're able to do with what we have. And unfortunately, I also spend a lot of time trying to dig into and understand what a system is if I can't readily find that information. So I think for those of us who have to deal with the incredibly savvy requesters who really do want to know every single detail and get in the weeds of what you're doing, and who are ready to challenge your search declarations in court if what you say doesn't exactly comport to what's online, I think having this update would be incredibly helpful for those who are in that position.
Okay, yeah, James.
So James Stoker, Trinity Washington University. Speaking for historians, and I think to a certain extent for other researchers, in many cases, when we make FOIA requests, we kind of assume, I think correctly, that we often know more about the subject than the people who are going to end up doing the search. And so it's very useful to know what record sets they're looking at, particularly when it concerns historical data, because oftentimes we'll have an idea of where the appropriate records lie and kind of guide the person doing the search to the right records. So the more transparency there is about that, the better from our perspective. Thanks.
I'm going to just call out on Michael Morrissey from the requester perspective.
Yeah.
Any feedback you might want to share?
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
This is Michael Morris. It was great to hear Capstone called out, and I think this has been a really wonderful perspective because I think, agencies have really, really improved their FOIA pages. A lot of agencies have really improved their FOIA pages over the last few years, and I think it's great to see a lot of these reading rooms come to life. I remember for years talking with FOIA offices, and they only had like 10 megabytes or 20 megabytes of storage on their FOIA reading room, which was pretty limited, and it seems like a lot of those limitations are no longer present. One of the things that I think it's really challenging to come up with resources that requesters are going to take advantage of. I think having sort of indexes or detailed technical dives of sort of how stuff is structured is really tough. And I think one of the surprising things to me, as sort of Capstone has pushed agencies to improve their email retention and management strategies, is like, I think that's an opportunity for resources that say, hey, if you want to request email from my agency, here's what you should know. And there are a few agencies that have example requests of like how to if you're requesting email, this is some stuff to keep in mind. Here's some sample language that might make this more successful. And I think requesters do really respond to materials that are like, here's what you should know for requesting emails from agency X, or here's what you should think about when requesting historical files from agency Y. And doing it less as sort of like our comprehensive FOIA guide, where people are kind of expected to really sit down and dive through it, and more kind of guiding people with some of the most common request types. Some of our most popular guides and resources that we've worked on for requesters are, very basic tips on like, here's really understandable language about putting together a fee waiver request, or what's the definition of this? Because that's something like even basic stuff like that. OIP has really detailed guidance on sort of the criteria, and a lot of agencies do a good job of including that. But it's really, really hard for requesters to understand, okay, what does that actually mean in plain language I can understand? And I think that sort of context is really challenging. So I think using Capstone as an opportunity for the agencies that are participating in it to think about resources like how can we guide requesters.
Yeah. I know. All right, well, how can we help requesters?
We'll wait.
The other comments on the first recommendation? Okay, so we'll move on. We have six more to go. Yeah, we got
Alina,
more to
how
go
do
here.
you wish to proceed? Do you want to get a sense of the committee, or do you want us to march through, or?
Sure, I'm happy to get a sense of the committee. Maybe Michael will tune back in. Do you want to take I don't think we need to take an informal vote at this point,
Okay.
but, what I'm generally hearing, I'll just try to quickly summarize. I'm hearing some support from some corners of the table, so it seems like it's a good idea generally to move forward on the recommendation. How it's implemented, I think, is the key, right? It's always the follow-up. So is that a fair summary? Everyone agree? Everyone on the phone? Who's still left on the phone, who hasn't hung up on us?
As procedurally here, what Ryan and I and the committee members would do is take back whatever feedback from here,
Sure.
and we'll proceed, march forward, either whether it's December or the next meeting, to present what we are proposing as our subcommittee report. And so we really do want to, take the temperature of the room and figure out if there is a consensus to move forward on all of these. So
Jason, before you go on, I heard a beep. Michael, are you back on?
Hi, sorry about that. I'm in a basement in solidarity with everybody, and I got the best of myself on.
So you left us on a cliffhanger. What requesters
No,
want?
I think trying to experiment with really readable, targeted materials, so rather than saying, hey, here's our FOIA guide, maybe almost more similar to sort of the wonderful blog post that OJIS puts out, being like, here's what you need to know about requesting emails from our agency and that sort of thing. I think requesters do really, really appreciate and use stuff that's sort of simple, action item oriented and kind of written from sort of specific point of view versus a more comprehensive resource that does put more work on them.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
Yeah, I'll just say that I respect the the opinions that Patricia and Melanie and others have said that it may be that the FOIA requester doesn't, the typical FOIA requester doesn't necessarily ask for things or think about records categories or records management as part of a FOIA request. But those of us who know what the resources of agencies are in terms of their file plans, their schedule, particularly their record schedules, the fact that a capstone 6.1 general record schedule exists, it seems to me that with a minimal effort, one could provide links and provide just a little bit of a guide in wherever FOIA questions are so that they know something more about the workings of the agency. Not every requester will care, but I suspect that there's a segment of requesters that would benefit from the way the government itself categorizes its records and talks about its policies. And so it's in that spirit that we're putting this forward.
This is Emily. Can folks hear me?
Yeah, if you can speak up a little bit, that would be even better.
Okay, great. Sorry, I've tried to call back in a couple of times. I keep getting dropped. I'm not sure what's going on. Probably on my end. I just wanted to echo the sentiment that this sort of information would be extremely helpful to requesters, and whether or not organizations like mine or others that attempt to really understand how records are managed and kept before filing a FOIA request, even the most savvy requester, there have been cases where, it's rare, but we've gone to discovery to understand how records are managed and kept. And I think it's not just that this would be helpful to the savvy requester, but I think it would really build a culture of understanding where if, excuse me, if people were more accustomed to this information being available and there were more trainings and more, in my world, we develop practice pointers for attorneys or others who are interested in doing FOIA requests, where this information is kind of filtered down a little bit more and there becomes a culture around that and an understanding that information is available. I think that it would have long-term beneficial effects.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Emily. This is Ryan again. So your point is a really natural transition to our second recommendation, which is around training for FOIA professionals on records management. So shall I pass the ball to you, Jason?
Okay. So we have it up on the screen for the wider audience. We recommend that the archivist of the U.S. direct, NARA, and request that DOJ OIP offer targeted training, selected topics in federal records management to FOIA officers, FOIA public liaisons at federal agencies, and otherwise include a FOIA module in selected records management training courses open to all federal employees. It's certainly clear, it's been clear to me for many years as a government person in my past, and that OIP does a tremendous job in teaching FOIA and is looked to as the gold standard. There are other places that one could have FOIA training, but it is OIP that has led the effort. Similarly, on records management, NARA has in the past done both face-to-face courses. I participated in one as a course for lawyers for many years, and is now, I think, concentrating on online training for the most part going forward. Regardless of how the formatting is, what this recommendation is saying is that we're urging that there's be some consideration on both halves, that when FOIA training is conducted, that there's some reference, some module, something that ties in records management concerns so that FOIA people in the larger FOIA community that are taking the wonderful FOIA courses at DOJ and other places understand what Capstone is and understand what electronic record keeping is at their agencies, and so know where to go for potentially responsive records. So I think that's on that side, and on the narrow side, if there's the opportunity to build in some FOIA awareness or access purposes, that records management is not just to preserve stuff, but also to make available to the wider public, I think that would be a good thing. I think people know it generally, but the people who take it courses may, I think, only to the benefit of knowing something so that you don't have siloed worlds of FOIA over here and records management expertise over here. It's all federal records / agency records with an asterisk. I know the difference, and one could have an esoteric conversation about that. But in general, the Venn diagram is that 98% is all records of the government and should be thought of in a way that's more integrated. So that's what this recommendation is all about.
Hi, this is Patricia West. I wholeheartedly support this recommendation, and I echo Jason's compliments about OIP. Their courses are excellent, and I think they would do us all a great service if they were able to offer courses on records management.
Anyone else? Comments around the table? Comments on the phone? Okay, that was an easier one.
Great. Okay. Next recommendation, if put up on the screen, number 3.
I'm working on it.
Okay, great. We recommend the Archivist of the U.S. request that at DOJ OIP provide further best practice guidance on what constitutes FOIA, for FOIA purposes, an adequate search of agency records managed in electronic form, including but not limited to email in Capstone repositories. So when we looked at the across the board on the Chief FOIA Officer reports, and I'm going to dovetail, or this conversation very much follows on what Eric and Michael were speaking to. We also read all the reports. There is definitely a movement in government recognizing, leveraging technology. Many agencies are talking about it in various ways across the spectrum of expertise. What we didn't see in the Chief FOIA Officer reports, and it may well be that agencies are doing it but not reporting out in that vehicle, but mention made of e-discovery tools that use what I consider and what many consider to be best practices in the space involving AI, machine learning, technology-assisted review, predictive coding. We are entering a world of electronic government. The transition to electronic records memo is pointing the way post-2022 for the entire government to be essentially thinking about digital forms of records and permanent preservation, and FOIA access will be to those ever larger collections of electronic records, of which Capstone is the first harbinger, but it's not the last. It will be in all kinds of formats and whatever. It seems to me that we should be doing more. This recommendation would build on the excellent guidance that DOJ already has with respect to FOIA processing, but to put an emphasis on using the best available tools out there. Now, part of this recommendation still is to be drafted, which is that we suggest an Appendix A to a report out by the subcommittee that essentially is a best practices set of specifications and requirements with respect to conducting searches using e-discovery protocols, and we think that such a sort of a best practices guide, a protocols set of specs would be of help in developing RFIs or RFPs by agencies, including under the current GSA Schedule 36 for records management or otherwise. And so all of this is saying is that we'd be recommending that there's some focused attention on the world of search technology, very much in parallel with what the Technology Subcommittee I would expect would be reporting out as best practices here.
So with that, we'll pause, see if there's any comments or questions.
This is Chris Knox. Jason, under the last subcommittee, there was a recommendation included for agencies to adopt or look into adopting e-discovery technologies for search. Is this just further deepening that recommendation, or can you explain the difference between this and what the
I think this goes a step further because I think there is, when you read the Chief FOIA Officer reports, there is in many cases, there is a touchstone of mention of e-discovery tools, but the e-discovery tools, as you know, that are out there they provide a tremendous opportunity to do searching in more efficient ways than simply the baseline of deduplication or email threading or keyword search. And so what we didn't see is some, at least mention, it's really a vision for the future, but a mention of the fact that there is this ability to perform more efficient searches, and there's going to be a need given the growth of Capstone repository. So I think the prior recommendation was there as kind of a baseline. This builds on it, and it's focused on giving some greater direction. And again, it would be it will be helped by an appendix, I think, to our report where it gives an e-discovery workflow that's applicable to FOIA, and certainly would want to have conversations with the Technology Subcommittee as well so that we're not at cross purposes.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Thank you.
And I think I heard someone on the phone.
Yeah, someone on the phone.
Hi, this is Tricia West. So I always love getting guidance from YP, but I think this one might be a bit difficult for them because, just as the gentleman who were presenting earlier today, Eric and Michael, mentioned, every agency is different and has different tools. And I think we're all using what we have to, as best as we can. So I don't know, I'm just looking at it. I wonder if that might be a difficult task for OIP. And I'm very I'm very aware of the with Capstone. I do know the volume of emails that we have to review. It's just going to increase and increase more and more. It's already quite voluminous, and I'm not sure what the solution is there. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thanks, Patricia. Anyone else on the phone want to comment or ask questions? Anyone at the table? On recommendation 3. Okay, you have now gotten the sense of the committee.
Thanks. Okay.
Thank you.
I will go on. So recommendation 4. We're up to 4, Kristen.
The clicker is being a little
temperamental.
difficult.
Yes.
There we go.
Got it.
You just need Ryan to stand up.
And recommendation 4 is that we recommend that as part of the Federal Electronic Records Modernization Initiative, known as FERMI, the Archivist of the United States direct narrative to incorporate and further develop the idea of public access to federal records, including through FOIA. This is a recommendation that essentially is raising the profile of FOIA as part of FERMI. Access is already embedded. If you look at the details of FERMI, it's there somewhere. It's in a maintenance and use section of FERMI in some specifications that at 2.01, records of current and former employees must be managed in a manner that supports searching in response to information requests, including FOIA. But what we're advocating here is that NARA's initiative in this area include a use case involving FOIA access. We had conversations with NARA. We should say the subcommittee all along has been working, Alina and Kirsten put us with a liaison of Kyle, who works for Lawrence Brewer, and Kyle Douglas, and we've appreciated his efforts and the efforts of others who've come in to talk to us about this. So I think we had this conversation at some point along the way, and we got support in that NARA would think it's a good thing for us to be advocating for a FOIA use case. I'll defer to Alina if you want to supplement on where things are on the NARA side. But anyway, this is something that we believe NARA is already on board with.
I think that's a fair characterization based on the feedback we've gotten so far. So, yeah. I'm watching Martha shake her head. She's been working on the FERMI initiative as well, so, and understands it a lot more than I do. Questions from anyone at the table or comments? How about folks on the phone? Okay.
All right, Jason, I'll take 5, and
Okay.
you could fill where I've missed.
Go right ahead.
Okay, so recommendation 5. Want me to get it, Kirsten?
Yes, please.
I'll get it.
As soon as he stands up, though, it seems to work.
The battery may be dead. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So the subcommittee for recommendation 5 recommends that the Archivist of the United States make a formal request to the chair of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, the group from which we heard earlier this year, or we heard from some members of that group earlier this year,
Right.
excuse me, and consider designating as a cross-cutting project or priority area the issue of how agencies are doing in providing FOIA access to agency records in electronic or digital form. As I mentioned, we previously heard from several members of the committee, and we heard that this group is an independent entity established within the executive branch that addresses integrity, economy, and effectiveness of issues that transcend government agencies, so that are common to most federal agencies. And one of the potential areas that we discussed at one of our last committee meetings with that group was that we may consider recommending that we seek out that group to establish as a cross-cutting area of interest or area that they'll look into in the future, records management and FOIA. And so we recommend that the archivist, either on his own or with the Inspector General of NARA, to formally request that they elevate the issue of how agencies are doing in providing access to records maintained in electronic form. And so this may align with the new goals that were established in OMB Memo 1921, which is Electronic Records Management Initiatives, requiring agencies to manage all records in electronic format by the end of 2022, and to no longer store and maintain records in paper form. And then finally, we recommend that Inspector General officers should consider establishing a point of contact who will function as in-house expert on records management and access issues that will keep track of any audits conducted with respect to records management and potentially make recommendations there. What did I miss, Jason?
I think you summarized it. I think this recommendation came directly out of a public meeting on this term where it seemed like it would be a good thing for us to formally recommend that SIGI seriously consider the issues that are cross-cutting across all agencies involving FOIA. And we wanted just to push the the issue forward in terms of a recommendation.
I'm looking at Tom, because he, I know, commented earlier that you thought it was a very good idea. Any other thoughts?
I suggested it at the meeting.
He suggested it at the meeting. Any other comments, or?
No.
Okay.
I'm on this committee.
All right. Good job. Questions from anyone else at the table on recommendation 5? Okay, folks on the phone, anyone have any questions or comments on recommendation 5? I heard someone drop off, so it might be.
Might be Michael again.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I think you have a good sense of that, so we're going to go on, we're going to try to go on to number 6.
Thanks, Ryan. You got it.
Thank you.
Recommendation 6 is that we recommend the Archivist of the United States direct NARA and request that DOJ OIP each establish a liaison with the newly created Chief Data Officer, CDO Council, for the purpose of ensuring that CDO officials understand the importance of federal record keeping and FOIA requirements and how such laws apply to the maintenance of data within agencies. The Foundations and Evidence-Based Policymaking Act that passed in January of 2019, which incorporated the Open Government Data Act, provides for a new Chief Data Officer Council. The OMB memo, M1923, that was dated July 10, 2019, which implements phase 1 of what will be a 3-phase program, according to OMB, implementing the Evidence Act, talks about the setting up of a data governance body in each agency to enforce priorities for managing data as a strategic asset to support the agency in meeting its mission. And the appendix to that OMB memo states that each agency's data governance body is to include the agency's general counsel, its chief freedom of information officer, senior agency official for records management, and others. In my perspective as a kind of information governance guy, this is exactly the kind of thing that, that I've been speaking to, finding a champion, a set of C-suite people who care about data strategy and the management of information. What is missing in both the statute as well as the OMB memo, other than the mention of chief FOIA officers, is a paragraph discussing the Federal Records Act or FOIA. Because the memo takes its cue from the statute talking about data and open data and the need for chief data officers to be on top of many different aspects of the life cycle of data. But as we all know, data that is either generated by the U.S. government or received and used by the U.S. government are federal records. And they're in large part agency records that are FOIAble. And so all this recommendation is that when CDOs are set up at NARA and DOJ, and that that we are recommending that they be tasked with the kind of clearinghouse function where they're at meetings of the future CDO council when it's set up and in whatever shape or form it's in, that there's some attention paid to records along with considerations of putting data up on the web and making it available and making it accessible and machine readable and all that. So it's really injecting the notion of records because of this sort of a priori two statutes that have been long-standing for 50, 60, 70 years, but not mentioned in otherwise recent guidance. And so that's why we're pushing this forward as I think we have standing to do that as part of our committee.
Jason, I'll just add 3 points. So first, you mentioned the guidance, I'm told, is imminent and should be released soon on some action items for the chief data officer role at each agency. Second, one of the primary responsibilities of the chief data officer is to be responsible for the complete information life cycle. And so that touches not only records management, but the Paperwork Reduction Act, the Privacy Act, disclosure of information under the Privacy Act, under FOIA as well. And so it's important that professionals from those areas are involved in that process. The recent guidance does, as Jason pointed out, suggest that agencies ensure that those professionals are included in those in the agency councils for the chief data officer. There will be the government-wide council, which will need representation. So I think that's part of our recommendation here. A third point, which we discussed briefly at our last subcommittee meeting, is just something we will need to think and talk about with Alina and Kirsten, is on timing. Our recommendations for this committee will come out, for the FOIA Advisory Committee will come out in 2021.
2020. 2020.
2020, I'm sorry. The activities around the Chief Data Officer and the Evidence Act implementation are happening now. OMB is having orientation sessions for the 3 specific roles created under the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, I believe next week. And so there will be a number of activities that begin as soon as this fall and winter that will need, that we believe, the subcommittee believes that FOIA officers and records professionals will have a role in participating in. So it may be unprecedented to push forward a recommendation prior to our full recommendations coming out, but it's something we should consider based on the timing of this. So are there any questions, comments about her?
Reactions to
Hi,
that?
this is Patricia Wath. I'm glad that you brought this memo to my attention. I'm not familiar with it. Can you tell me who the chief data officer should be at each agency? What are the requirements to designate such a chief data officer?
Right. This is Ryan. So Patricia, you should look to OMB Memo 1923, which was issued in July. It doesn't specifically say who should be a chief data officer, but it lists a number of roles and responsibilities and also knowledge and experience that that individual should have. My experience is that agencies are doing different things, and that OMB's intention wasn't to require agencies to do any one specific thing. They wanted to be flexible in that. And so many agencies are hiring chief data officers as a new position. Some of those are GS employees and others are executive level. Some agencies are appointing existing staff. For example, at Treasury, we've appointed not just one person, but several to be the chief data officer until we're able to hire a designated chief data officer, of which I am a member of that group. So FOIA and records management already have a seat at the table there, so we're very happy about that. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that for more information, but there is more guidance coming soon from OMB.
Okay,
And
thank you. Yeah, I will look at that after the meeting. Thank you very much. I believe in, communication and folks talking together, so I think it's a great idea for, to establish a liaison, NARA and OIP with this Chief Data Officer Council. It sounds like a good idea to me.
This is Melanie. I just wanted to let you know that within DOJ, our Chief Data Council includes OIP. So we're already there.
Good.
And you have a chief data officer?
Yes, our CIO is our Chief Data Officer.
Got it.
Okay.
This is Tom Sussman. On the issue of timing, I don't believe there's any protocol that would prevent the advisory committee from issuing a final recommendation on this subject in December. I think we probably need that much notice with what we have. And I guess the other question is, given the speed at which this wonderful subcommittee, and especially you two guys, have been working, we may be ready to vote on it on the entire subcommittee recommendation in December, and then go on to either assist the other 2 subcommittees or even perhaps come up with some more refined sort of stage 3 issues out of this that we could begin the process of exploring.
This is Ryan. Tom, I agree. I think Jason could probably come up with 18 more recommendations for records management. So, but that's a good idea. I think if we might want to particularly on the guidance that comes from OMB next. That will lay out some timelines, deadlines for specific action items for the CDO council, for the CDOs at each agency. And we could, if we get some guidance, if we're able to get a recommendation, particularly that one done by December and out, I think that would be very helpful.
And as for your broader point, Tom, it's appreciated as a friendly amendment. To our remarks, the thing is that I want to build in time for James, and we are still talking about one or two possible further recommendations. And so I'm not sure that the cycle will permit a complete slate being presented in December, but we could certainly work on a report. You know, I'm sure Ryan and I can come up with something by this weekend if you want to.
Again, I think we've talked about this before. I think we can be very flexible, so piecemeal is also okay. If this recommendation in particular, number 6, sorry, this is Alina. See, I do it all the time. This recommendation, if it's time sensitive, we can certainly entertain it sooner rather than later. So December seems to be a good time. Can I see some nods around the table? Yeah? Sure. Nods on the phone?
Sure.
Okay, I got a sure. All right.
Yeah.
All right,
I didn't hear my head nodding, but I was agreeing as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk about procedurally how we can
Sure.
transmit that to the full committee for a vote. Okay. And the 7th recommendation, if Ryan, you could change the slide.
Yes.
Oh, you got it. You got it.
Yes.
Very good. Technology. So we recommend that the Archivist of the United States work with other governmental components and industry in promoting research into using artificial intelligence, AI, including machine learning technologies, to do 2 things. 1, to improve the ability to search through government electronic record repositories for responsive records, and 2, to segregate sensitive material in government records, including but not limited to material otherwise within the scope of the 9 FOIA exemptions. And so this also comes from our reading of Chief FOIA Officer reports and what this committee has done in the past. I think, as has been alluded to by our guest speakers, Eric and Michael, that there is a world of AI out there, but it hasn't specifically been tuned to FOIA or to sensitivities that are represented within the 9 FOIA exemptions. So part of this recommendation is to encourage research that the NITR-D part of government, the agencies that are responsible for the Networking Information Technology Research and Development Program, and other possible candidate agencies like OSTP or NIST, who are chief privacy officers from selected agencies, that this initiative is put forward to solve the problem that is looming, which is that there will be hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of electronic records. For FOIA to do its job, it would be great, I think, if machine learning tools that are out there could be tested and that supported through whatever government grant or initiative or whatever money can be found to advance the ball, so that we basically have a world where we can take a collection of 1 million electronic objects and through machine learning have the FOIA exempt material be brought to the fore in clusters, that see patterns in the larger data set, so that, oh, this blob of stuff, this subgroup is more likely to contain deliberative and pre-decisional stuff, or privileged stuff, or confidential proprietary stuff, or law enforcement stuff. These are not impossible tasks. They are very much like the basic machine learning tools that in e-discovery for responsive records or not responsive. It's just tuning the responsiveness question to a specific set of what the exemptions hold. And so, but it is something that you can't buy off the shelf, as far as I'm aware, although there are some solution providers that say some things in this space, but it's not so easy to just take it and run with it today. I think it would be, what we're recommending is that the government support research that is focused on that. And of course, the broader issue of searching through large collections generally. And I'm sure we can do a better job for Capstone and otherwise for the government supporting machine learning tools that accomplish lots of search purposes. So that's what this recommendation is about.
Okay, comments, questions?
Hi, this is Patricia West. So I like this recommendation a lot. Recently, I I was assisting our Congressional Affairs Office, and I had to weed through 1,600 emails. None of them were responsive. And, you know, my agency uses great search tools. So I support this. The one thing, Jason and Ryan, maybe you could, some thoughts I had is, you know, if someone's doing the research on this, it would be, you know, the research is great, but getting it out, sharing it with the agencies is huge. And I'm wondering, could this be something that the Chief FOIA Officers Council Technology Subcommittee, is this something that these gentlemen, you know, could be tasked with?
So I guess one way of framing that is whether the recommendation should be revised to specifically call out the technology subcommittee to be a part of the process, whether to be taking the lead or at least part of this. I don't call them out in the current text, and so I think that's well taken. Of course, you guys need to not sunset.
But I mean, to me, it's Patricia Webb again. It seems like I mean, they've already begun the process. I think they would be the perfect candidates for this research.
Well, they would be a platform for taking the good efforts that have been done by whomever ends up actually doing the work of this with a megaphone to the FOIA community, and that I think is a very valuable point.
So do you envision the agencies doing the research and sharing the information with?
So it would be my dream that the NITR-D community, which is, the president publishes a research budget every year, and that we get a line item for $1 billion, you know, devoted to FOIA exemption sensitivities and large data collections and how to use AI techniques. Short of that, but what this is calling for is really a research by scientists at government agencies, or at least the ability to grant or provide funds for that kind of research. It's not for people with serious jobs doing FOIA work to devote some portion of their time to thinking about the best AI machine learning efforts. While it can be certainly supported by a whole bunch of agencies that we listed in our recommendation, I think we really need to focus on those parts of the government that are that enable partnerships with the private sector to happen and produce real research.
This is Chris Knox. As a side note,
So I guess I'm sorry, Jason. I'm not clear. You would have industry and who would be doing the research?
Well, that's for the NITR-D community and for whoever's involved. I mean, in the rosiest scenario, the archivist would make this recommendation. It would be picked up by one or more places in government as putting on a regulatory agenda to do, or an action item agenda, and then it can be figured out by an interagency task force. It could be figured out by NSF. There are any number of players in the space, as to how exactly the money would come, where it would come from, and how it would be spent. We're not fleshing that out in this form. I mean, if the sense of the committee is that we need to drill down and have a path forward for this, I'd be happy to entertain that and have further conversations so that we're giving more direction to the archivist.
More is better than less.
And I see you also envision establishing a private-public partnership. So that's what you're talking about.
Definitely, yes. That would be one of the options for this.
AI and machine learning, again, this is Chris Knox. AI and machine learning has been mentioned 10 different times in this meeting. Would it be beneficial, I don't know what our speakers look like in future meetings, but if there was some way to find a government thought leader in this area that could come talk about the art of the possible? You touched on some of the possibilities, but maybe driving a little deeper, spending 15 minutes in a presentation, maybe even 30 minutes, and talking about what could be possible if research was done in this area. Would the group benefit from that, the committee benefit from that, or does everybody have a general understanding of what we could be doing? What is the art of possible here?
I mean, I think I'll defer to Alina on what, for future meetings and what the agenda might be. I think, Chris, we could certainly have a conversation offline as to whether having a speech in a public forum would be beneficial both to us as well as to the greater public at large. I think the administration is very supportive of an executive order on AI. There are a lot of experts on AI. What we need is to focus them on FOIA and on records concerns. And so I'm happy to work with you and others to find the right people to maybe be the go-to people who would receive such a recommendation and carry it forward. There are people at NIST, and there are people at NSF, and there are people at NIDRD that I think would be interested.
Yeah, my thought would be if we could get them to come speak to us and then we pique their interest in our particular topic. It's kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're open to that, absolutely. Kirsten and I, this is Alina. We don't have a speaker on deck for the December meeting. So if there's interest in that, we can certainly work on making that happen.
Yeah,
Kevin?
This is Kevin. Yeah, okay. I would actually have a personal interest in hearing that. I wasn't sure how it was going to fit in at first because these recommendations are pretty far down the line and I wasn't sure if we would have time or what we have scheduled. But if you're telling us there's an opening, and based on what Chris said, I do buy into the idea very much that we can help prime the pump for the recommendations to go outward. We've got nothing else lined up. I'd love to hear that.
Okay. All right, well, we'll work.
James Jacobs.
Sorry, is that Michael?
No, James.
Oh, James, sorry, James.
A quick comment, if I may. At the risk of seeming to be a shill, my library, Stanford Libraries, is creating some open source software called EPAD. It's EPADD, and it's sort of what we're talking about here. It incorporates techniques of CS and computational linguistics, AI, machine learning, in the analysis and preservation and discovery of email archives. So it might be something of interest for this committee to look at.
Okay, sounds great.
And just one last comment. I wasn't recommending that in any way hold up this recommendation. I definitely support this recommendation 100%.
Alina, I twice have promised that James has an opportunity to speak about a further recommendation that we didn't include because it still is in play among ourselves. But if with your allowance, James Jacobs can speak to what his idea is. It's sort of a vision. It's like he's doing a dual purpose on both the records management and the vision committee here. But James, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for giving the time. Yeah, there's one further recommendation that that is in the process of being discussed and hashed out. I really appreciate Jason's perspective on this. So the recommendation is for the Archivist of the United States to direct NARA and OGIST and request DOJ and OIP to encourage agencies to work toward a goal of collecting, describing, and giving access to FOIA-related records in one or more central repositories in standardized ways. This is just the current draft recommendation that we're coming to. It's really, it might split into two recommendations. One about the use of central FOIA repositories as a good goal, and one on the use of XML and machine-readable formats and metadata. And it comes out of the idea kind of coalesced from two places for me. One is Document Cloud's public catalog and database. And a hat tip out to Michael and the Muck Rock gang for putting that together. And the other place that it comes out of is Representative Quigley's Transparency in Government Act that he has submitted, introduced in every Congress since at least the 111th Congress. And one of the pieces of that Transparency in Government Act is a section on creating a structured database of completed FOIA requests. And so we're still working on the wording of these of this recommendation / perhaps two recommendations, but that's coming down the line, and we hope to have that together in the next month or so.
This is
Did I miss anything, Jason?
Yes, great.
This is Melanie. I just want to direct you to the work of 18F that we did prior to launching the National FOIA portal, because one of the things we were researching was the concept of a virtual government-wide FOIA library. And the conclusions, the bottom line conclusion of 18F and DOJ at the conclusion of our work there was that metadata tagging was really the best way to do it, as opposed to, I think, what a lot of us thought about, which was like sort of having a website where all of the stuff like physically resides. We're sort of past that now. So the work is there in the report from in connection with the National FOIA portal. So that's just be an important thing to look at.
Thanks, Melanie. I appreciate that.
Sure.
I had looked at 18F, and the other place that's interesting to me is data.gov.
Right.
Which is doing for data across the government what I feel like would be interesting to do for FOIA records. Yeah. And so I'll definitely look at the 18F work and incorporate that. Part of what we're working in as well is the FOIAonline.gov, which does start to have a central digital repository, but there are only a small subset of agencies currently using that system. So we're working on that.
Okay, any other comments on potential recommendation number 8? Okay, before we move on to public comments, I want to just give an opportunity to Eric and Michael to say yay or nay to continuing your mission, because it looks like we're giving you some more homework. So they're conferring. Right. They're conferring. They'll get back to us. Right. Yeah. Like the British Empire, the sun will never set on our... Yeah. All right. Ryan and Jason, do you have a good sense of where you're at? And you have a feedback from the committee.
It's very helpful, the comments today, and frankly, I'm going to have to return. I'm going to have to go back to REI and return the flak jacket that I bought last night in anticipation of today. I think it's been a very useful session, and we'll just move forward with finalizing the report as best we can.
All right, great. Thank you very much for all your hard work. We really appreciate it. Okay, so believe it or not, we're already at 12:45, 12:44, I should say. So at this time, I want to give members of the public the opportunity to comment. For the next 15 minutes, we will hear comments from those of you who are in attendance. I'm also going to look to Sheila Portanova, our attorney advisor at OGIS, who's been monitoring the live stream. If there are any comments from or questions from those folks watching us on live stream, you'll read them out loud to us. That would be great. When you come up to the mic, please state your name and affiliation if applicable.
Thanks. My name's Alex Howard, currently affiliated with epluribusum.org, though I have worked with non-governmental groups that focus upon open government, transparency, and improving the FOIA, and particularly the use of technology in government for good governance. So it's great to be back here. Thank you again for making this forum open and accessible to the public, particularly on a live stream, which extends the reach and also makes this accessible to people thereafter. And as you know, on YouTube, there's automatic transcription. It's great to see accessibility continue to be a priority here at the archives. I was unable to find the FOIA recommendations OGIS referred to earlier in this discussion on its website, blog, or social media. When I asked about it on YouTube, the archive staff responded to me where they had linked to that document, that PDF. I asked if they could tweet that out, and they said they would.
Great.
And that experience is a great example of how the U.S. government can be immediately responsive when they hadn't made an asset available to the public in a proactive way. And I wanted just to highlight that as an example that I personally experienced here that is not always the case across the agencies. Second, I wanted to give some thanks to Director Postay for her long record of service. While we've had our differences on policy and the performance of OIP at various times, I've always appreciated your willingness to meet, to take questions, particularly in the new FOIA.gov, and to stand up for the value of transparency and open government on behalf of our country at a lot of international forums. So thank you for that. I hope the Department of Justice finds a worthy candidate who will build upon your record at OIP and improve compliance across the federal government, particularly in the creation of some of the resources that have been discussed here, which I believe really should fall within DOJ's work, not just to ask questions, but to lead in terms of compliance, and maybe to use your authority to enforce compliance at some point, which you have under the statute. There was an earlier reference from the State Department staff adopting a release-to-one, release-to-all policy for the FOIA for disclosure, which many of the public knows about because of the publication of former Secretary of State Clinton's email at foia.state.gov. Issues around discoverability of those records in a personal system highlighted a major issue for FOIA officers across state and federal governments with respect to responsive searches and the use of e-discovery tools that have been referenced here. And I'm grateful that OIP, OGIS, and NARA have reminded agencies that records must be memorialized when public business is conducted in private systems, and hope that you will all remind agencies of the guidance with respect to the need to make sure that anything that happens on personal devices or email is put into places where the FOIA officers can find it. Director Postay, is there any update on the policy for release-to-one, release-to-all that DOJ took public comment from over 2 years ago? Are members of the committees aware of any agencies that have adopted such a policy on their own or the impact of doing so?
Oh, wow. I always thank you for your initial comments, especially, Alex. I always like to make sure people remember that Release to One, Release to All is a DOJ initiative. And so we started it with a pilot, and obviously we've been champions. We've used that word before. We really believe in the idea of it. But as you know, and as I've explained time and time again in answer to your question, there are these difficult resource issues that agencies face with posting everything that's released under the FOIA, and concerns by agencies that doing more posting means they might have less resources available to do processing. And so it's a trade-off it's not an easy trade-off. So what we encourage agencies to release as much proactively as they can. And obviously, I am a big proponent of, to the extent agencies can feasibly post FOIA process records online, they should. And I of course smiled when I heard that our state has been doing it for quite some time. And we do have other agencies that are following on their own a release to one, release to all. And then, of course, with the amendments to the FOIA, we now have all agencies are required to post at 3 requests. So we definitely have a lot more proactive posting going on. Obviously, I share the interest that you have in making as much information available proactively so that people don't have to make requests for it. That benefits everyone, and FOIA offices certainly love it, to be able to point someone to something on the website. So we continue to encourage agencies to do it, and definitely have examples of agencies that are doing it.
Thank you for that. The research I've seen at the state and city level shows that proactive disclosure as open government data does in fact have an impact upon FOIA and the costs thereby. And since our federal government is spending quite a bit of money on FOIA, hundreds of millions of dollars perhaps, annually, it seems to make sense from a cost perspective to continue to drive agencies to be posting those documents and to direct people to that. I'm glad to hear that data.gov came up, since that does seem to be the natural place for the government to be posting responsive records in a structured format. There's a specific question that is also relevant to your office, but I'd love to hear from other members of the committee. You all may be well aware that when President Obama directed DOJ to look at extending this policy in December of 2016, he also established a cross-agency priority goal in the Freedom of Information Act. That CAP goal was then posted to performance.gov. It was removed from performance.gov in this administration, and there has been no one in the administration who has been willing to explain why it was removed. Can anyone here speak to why that CAP goal doesn't exist anymore, or whether it might be a useful thing for achieving many of the goals that you all have described? I'm sorry to hear that, or not hear it. Given that you were discussing recommendations to improve our nation's FOIA compliance and performance, it seems relevant that a directive from the past president to make this a cross-agency priority was removed, and I hope you all will consider making a recommendation that such a goal be restored, since it seems to be directly relevant to improving records management and to saving the nation money and being more accountable to the public. With respect to that, will the committee make any recommendations to Congress regarding the FOIA reform bill that members are drafting in the wake of this recent Supreme Court decision on FOIA?
I can certainly respond to that. It has not been on our agenda on any of the subcommittees. For committee members, something to chew over and see whether you want to discuss it within your own subcommittees. So putting it out there.
Draft is an active participation, and I would encourage you all to participate in offering your expertise on this count.
I just feel like I don't want to leave your previous question just completely left hanging. You've been here for the whole meeting, and this is the quintessential example of a cross-agency and both private and public sector group right here. And you heard from all these different subcommittees. You heard recommendation after recommendation. To me, what you just witnessed for 2 hours is a beautiful example of solid FOIA work being done across the government. There's certainly no lack of interest, motivation, initiative in FOIA across the government. So I'm sort of surprised that you would say that after listening for 2 hours.
Well, I've been reporting on the United States government's compliance with the FOIA for a decade here in D.C., and I've gone to the hearings at which Congress has held your office accountable for that performance. And I think we all can agree that when a president's management agenda includes certain CAP goals, it creates an understanding that this is a priority. The removal from such a goal also sends a signal across government. So while I am very grateful for the service and the commitment and the people here who are in government and for the people who are volunteering to serve in this community across the country, I think it is also fair to point out where and when given priorities have been deprioritized without any accountability or transparency, and the impact that may be having upon the shared goals of the people around this table and online. On this count, the U.S. law, respect to the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, which contains the Open Government Data Act, requires agencies to publish an enterprise data inventory. Here's what we've got. It does not require them to publish the data underlying it, but it does require them to make a listing of that. That data inventory should help both FOIA officers and requesters to know what agencies records have and whether they've already been disclosed online as open data. Again, saving the public and the press and watchdogs and Congress time. Are members of the committee aware of any guidance from the Office of Management and Budget regarding harmonizing the Open Government Data Act, which was signed into law in January, and proactive disclosure of records released under FOIA? If not, would you recommend that they do so?
Well,
Go ahead,
Alex,
Jason. Yeah,
Jason
yeah.
Barrett. I think your point is one that should be thought as part and parcel of the recommendation we're putting forward here, which is that CDOs of agencies make CDOs of NARA and DOJ and those that are well aware of records issues make known to the greater CDO community what kind of expectations there are of FOIA and the Federal Records Act. And so I think we could certainly incorporate your point in conversations going forward with the CDOs that are knowledgeable about records issues, informing the greater CDO community.
Thank you. As I've raised at different forums related to this committee and others, there's a substantial community of practice around the proactive disclosure of information as open government data that existed prior to the enactment of this law. If you look under Project Open Data Online, many of the best practices and ways to improve disclosure already exist there. The challenge that advocates continue to see is there is a void between the web staff of agencies, those who are entrusted with publishing this information, and the people who are operating FOIA reading rooms. And I would encourage your committee, in addition to these recommendations, to look at how and where these reading rooms are actually being used. We heard a comment from this gentleman about some people at agencies still talking about publishing records online. Of course, Congress has repeatedly instructed agencies to use these reading rooms. But when advocates from the National Security Archive have analyzed, we see this usage is not actually steady, right? And if there's a difference between what's being published in these reading rooms and what's happening elsewhere in the agency, it's not serving the public well. So I'm really glad to hear that you all are actively discussing these things, but it's surprising that there are still staff who aren't thinking about publishing records online. Since the FOIA is not just for the press, it's not just for the business, right? It's for the public to gain access to our records and benefit from them. So one last question on this count. The EPA's recent FOIA regulations, which I think we can all agree are not harmonized with the 2016 FOIA Improvement Act, were cited by the agency as reason not to accept FOIA requests over email. Do any of the members of this committee have a view on whether agencies should accept FOIA requests by email, or, relatedly, the character limit at FOIA Online, which poses an artificial limit upon a given FOIA request that is not laid out in the statute?
All right. You just really wanted to have a nice debate here. So there are sound reasons for agencies, if they have a portal, to have direct agencies to portals rather than emails. That's efficient. That gives efficiencies to everyone. These are all things that you've heard me explain before, Alex, that if you have a portal like we did with the National FOIA portal, where you have the requirements for each agency for making a request, and you have them have the requester then have to fill out those boxes in order for their request to go in. That means that when the request goes in, it's perfected. It's perfected. You don't have to then go back and forth. You didn't give us this, you didn't give us that. Whereas there is obviously a gut appeal to using email. I understand that. People think, oh, I just would rather just shoot an email to the agency. But if they just shoot an email and don't give all the information that they need to give for it to be a proper FOIA request, we haven't helped improve FOIA administration. You know, we've just made it worse. So there are, studying the National FOIA portal, that became very clear that there are benefits to using a portal over email. Now, we have at DOJ long told agencies that there needs to be electronic ways to make a request. And we've actually asked agencies in Chief FOIA Officer reports, do you accept requests electronically? So we certainly are well past the days where you had an agency say, I only take it by paper copy. That's gone. You have to have either email or portal, one or the other. That's definitely our guidance to agencies. And I don't know of any agency that doesn't take one or the other.
So are you saying that Justice Department is saying that there needs to be one or the other, so if the agency cannot accept it online for whatever reason, then they need to have an email address?
Sure.
Okay.
It's hard for me to think, well, in this day and age, it's hard for me to imagine that you can't do one or the other. Obviously not every agency has electronic availability through the National FOIA portal. So I can answer that. If you want to make a request electronically to any agency, use the National FOIA portal, and there you go. So you would never be forced to use anything other than electronic.
I would encourage you all to continue to speak and engage with the requester community, because I think you will find that the experiences and stories that they have to share are evidence that in 2019 there are still things which we would be surprised by in this day and age. And that as you research recommendations, that the requester community's experiences are incorporated into your recommendations. And they're represented here at the table and in different forums. Because I do think that the government-centric nature of these discussions sometimes doesn't incorporate those perspectives or the realities that people experience on the ground. When people received records that are wholly redacted, and then that's counted as being partially responsive, I think it jukes the stats. That's one example, but there are certainly many others too. And I do appreciate the opportunity to ask these questions. I do wish that more people made use of this time.
All right, thank you, Alex. Just wanted to ask Sheila, are there any questions or comments or statements online?
Unfortunately, I'm having some technical difficulties here on our live stream. I can't see it, but the last time I checked, the last time I was able to see it, there were not any questions.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't see anyone else lining up at the mic, so I think we're done with the public comment section, and I think we're 3 minutes over. So I appreciate all the hard work that has been going into everything we've been talking about. I think we're doing some great work. Please keep it up. The subcommittee should continue to meet. We certainly invite everyone to visit OGIS's website and social media for more information about our activities and how you can participate. Our next meeting is Friday, December 6th, 2019. Not this Friday. I just wanted to emphasize Friday because it's a little off day. We usually are on Thursdays. Friday, December 6th, 2019 at 10 a.m. You'll be watching us on Livestream, Melanie? Of course. Thank you again for your time and participation. Kirsten always reminds me to remind everyone on the committee to please leave behind their National Archives folders so we can recycle them for the next time and actually have content in them so we could reuse them for future meetings. Any questions from anyone? Not hearing any. Anyone on the phone have any questions? Okay, great. We stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.